Over the past 15 years, I've been focused on one thing: building startups from scratch. I also served as the director of an accelerator program based in Los Angeles, partnered with Google. And today I've trained more than 600 founders who have gone on to raise more than $56 million in funding. I've also been invited as a guest lecturer to speak at prestigious universities such as UCLA, Princeton, Pepperdine, and several more. I've also sold startups and failed startups. So I'm here today to tell you everything that you need to learn how to build a startup, how to launch a startup, how to grow a startup, and how to sell a startup. I'm literally gonna teach you all the strategies and tools that you can use to go from idea to revenue generating business without having any technical skills. And yes, 100% for free, but I can tell you right now that if you're not even able to sit through this entire video from start to finish, and it's very unlikely that you're gonna become a successful entrepreneur. Now, here are the topics that I'm gonna cover in this video. First, I'm gonna teach you how to come up with killer startup ideas from scratch. I'm then gonna teach you how to test any startup idea, cost effectively, of course. I'm then gonna teach you how to build a brand without expensive designers. Then we're gonna jump into how to build a website without any coding skills at all, leveraging no code. I'm gonna teach you how to shift to the entrepreneur mindset. It's completely different from what you have at a 9-to-5 job. We're then gonna jump into how to build your MVP, or the first version of your app, leveraging these no-code tools. We're gonna talk about how to pick the right business model for you. We're then gonna jump into how to sell. Then we're gonna talk about how to get your first paying customers. Then how we can build scalable marketing strategies. You're gonna see that those things are completely different. We're gonna talk about how to use AI to accelerate your business, of course, without getting lost in thousands of tools. How we can use no-code automation to scale our business. How to find a co-founder. This can be game-changing. Then how to create a pitch deck, which is the modern version of a business plan. How to get investors and how to get them to write that first check for you. How equity works and how it can be a powerful tool to motivate your team. We're then going to talk about how to sell a business. And finally, as a bonus module, I'll be talking about some of the largest mistakes that you can make and how to avoid them. Because we have so much to cover, let's jump right in. Okay, so first and foremost, how do you come up with a killer startup idea? Well, you've actually been sold 3 big lies over the past decade, probably, that are stopping you from getting started. The first lie comes from movies like The Social Network, where Mark Zuckerberg suddenly gets this amazing idea for Facebook. He runs to his studio apartment and starts building it. It's this idea of a light bulb moment that just lands on you and you have this perfect idea. But I'm sorry to tell you that that is not the way that most great startups are built. And frankly, unless you want to stay sat on your couch for the rest of your life waiting for that light bulb moment, there is a much better way. You can actually actively generate startup ideas and then select one of them to get started with. And in this section, I'm gonna break down 3 ways that you can do that actively instead of just waiting. The second big lie is that you have to come up with this groundbreaking, revolutionary idea that completely changes the world. We've kind of bought into this narrative because of big headlines on TechCrunch, but that honestly couldn't be further from the truth. Sam Parr, for example, the founder of The Hustle, built and sold a newsletter for $30 million. Nothing revolutionary, it's just a newsletter. And years later, he even convinced his friend Sean Puri to launch his own called The Milk Road that was also sold for 8 figures. So a much better strategy for you is to come up with an existing business model or concept and just have a nice twist or focus on a specific niche. Revolutionizing the world is overrated. Now, the third and final lie is that you have to have a perfect idea and a perfect plan. Here's the truth. You will be, if not completely, a little bit wrong, at least once you go to market with that idea. So starting off with a rough idea and going to market quickly is always going to beat overthinking, overanalyzing, researching the entire market for months and months and months, coming up with the perfect brand name for this thing, instead of actually just going to the market and testing it, which is what we're gonna teach in the next module. But to test an idea, we need an idea. So let's talk about the 3 active methods that you can use to come up with your idea and decide which one to start with. The first method is all about writing down problems every single day. You wanna probably write about 3 problems a day for about 30 days, you'll probably have 90 problems. They could be as simple as complex as you want. So it could be like, I left my keys at home, or it could be, this AI algorithm is difficult to understand. And they could be happening to you. They could also be happening to other people that you know who are complaining about their problems. You could also go and research online problems that other people are having. The goal at the end is to have 90 problems and then to think about 90 solutions that could solve that problem. The second one is based on trends. So you can go to the internet and find consulting companies that are basically making all their predictions. You can find a couple trends that you believe are definitely gonna happen. And then what you can start doing is figuring out like, okay, what kind of businesses are going to be built if this trend is correct? And then you wanna write down a couple of needs that would come up if that trend is right. And each one of those needs, you got it, can be converted into a startup idea. And yes, the goal is to come up with a bunch of ideas because then we're gonna wanna filter through and come up with just one that we're gonna work on. We're gonna talk about that later. Now, the third strategy I call the remora strategy because a remora fish is a fish that lives off of larger fish like sharks or turtles, for example, and they basically eat the food that's left behind. And although that might sound a little silly, some of the large companies that you know today, like Airbnb, Uber, or maybe Tinder, are leaving huge million-dollar opportunities because of the demand that they're already generating. So the concept here is basically to create complementary goods and services for these larger and growing companies that they would probably never go after. So for the idea of Airbnb, you could come up with something like a subscription box for small shampoos for all the hosts to be able to easily get them delivered on a monthly basis. They're probably buying these things already. So the goal with this strategy is to come up with 30 different businesses that you think are going to continue to grow over the next 10 years. And then you basically target their audiences. Okay, so once you've done that, you have a bunch of startup ideas. So how do you pick which one you actually want to execute on first? Well, let me actually show you on this board right now. So first of all, I would actually rank them. So it's like you want to figure out which ones are in the top ideas that you have, and then you can select one of those top ideas. So basically, we're rating them from 1 to 10 based on different criteria. The criteria that I like to use are as follows. The problem. Is this a really big problem? Is this a small problem? How severe is it? How often is it happening to these individuals? How good are the customers? Are they easy to reach? Are they easy to convince? How quickly do they make a decision? And how well is the founder fit for this specific idea? So founder fit, I would put as one of the big criteria. And you can select the criteria you want. I might have things like ease of execution, like do I have the resources? Do I think I can actually pull this off? Then based on these scores, you're gonna have a short list. So at this point, based on the short list, you might know exactly which idea you want, but if you still have a hard time deciding which one, I would actually grab your passion, like how much passion do you have for this? Let's make that one circle. Then we can have another circle be the skills that are required to execute on that. And we can make this another circle. Then the resources, do you have the resources? How easy is it to get access to those resources for you right now? Those might be money, those might be team members. And basically right here, my friends, is where you will be able to make a decision on which idea is best to take action on. So the idea here is to pick an idea that we can learn the skills and the process of launching a startup with. We want to figure out cost effectively if we are right or wrong about this idea, whether we need to change it a little bit for it to fit the market properly, or whether we are completely off. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in the next section. Okay, so now let's talk about how to test any idea cost effectively. Now, it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what anyone thinks about your startup idea. The only thing that matters is what your customers say they want, but more importantly, where they put their money. And just like Mike Tyson says it, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And that's pretty much exactly what happens when you bring a product or idea to market. There's almost no likelihood that you're gonna be 100% right about all your assumptions. So the most important thing is to quickly test and validate your startup idea before you dump years of your life and all of your savings into it. But what are you actually looking for when you test your startup idea, and how do you actually execute on that? Well, I'll get into the what specifically in just a couple of moments, but first let's talk about what we're actually looking for. You see, there are actually 3 huge pieces of the puzzle that make all the difference, and we have to figure out early on why, because it'll bite us in the butt later unless we figure them out early on. The first one is the ICP. What does that mean? It means ideal customer profile. So basically, who are you going to be going after? Remember, you have limited time and money to go after different segments, and some customers are gonna be way better than others. They'll have the money, they have the problem, they're willing to pay to solve it. Some people are gonna be very difficult to reach, very difficult to convince, they don't have the money to pay for it, yada yada. So early on, we have ideas of different segments of the market or different ideal profiles that we think would be interested in buying this product. So we're gonna wanna test out who that person is and whether or not we are right or wrong. Identify the right one. Number 2 is the problem. So if we've identified the individual, then let's talk and figure out the problem. Does the ICP that we've chosen actually have the problem that we are trying to solve? Are they already trying to solve it? Is this a problem that they would be willing to pay for to solve? If we can't identify the very clear problem and more importantly, the outcome that they want in using your product, then it's gonna be very difficult to get them to pay anything. And the third thing we absolutely need to get right is, are people willing to actually pay for it? This is the difference between a money hole and a revenue generating business. And if we don't get these 3 pieces of the puzzle right early on, it doesn't matter what else you do. It doesn't matter how beautiful your product is, because if it doesn't solve the problem, provide the outcome, then no one will be willing to pay for it. If we're after the wrong individual, we're gonna be convincing people all day long, and it's gonna be a huge waste of our time. So these are the 3 things we absolutely need to figure out. And of course, if we don't know how to monetize it, well, we do not have a business. Well, my friends, you'll be glad to know that there are 2 methods that have been used in Silicon Valley for half a century that allow you to test these different things out. The first one is called customer discovery. Now, this is a process through which we set up interviews or conversations with our future potential ideal customer profiles, and we find out a little bit more about their life, and we start asking them questions about their life, their current process, so we can understand if they are actually facing the problem that we believe they are facing. Now, the biggest mistake people make when they're told, hey, go and talk to customers, is to actually talk about their product. This is not a pitch at all. This is a conversation that we're having to just understand how people currently live their life, to see whether or not they're the right person to target with the product or service that we have in mind. And if you talk about your product early on, people are gonna give you the mom treatment. Everyone's mom is gonna tell them that they are beautiful and nice. And that's really nice, but it's not gonna help us figure out the harsh truth behind whether or not this startup is going to succeed. Another key rule here is to not ask if, would you, could you, is to really focus on past behavior, because past behavior is the best way to determine future behavior. So instead of being like, would you pay for a tool that did this, that, the other, what we're gonna ask for is, tell us about the last time that you faced this problem. Tell us about the last time you XYZ. What was the biggest problem in actually doing that? Did you try to solve this problem or not? Maybe the problem you think isn't even the problem that comes up, but how do you find these people and how do you book interviews with them? Well, that would be through LinkedIn prospecting. You could also do it by going to forums and finding where people are talking about these kind of problems and have a conversation. But these conversations are fundamental and they connect directly into sales, which we'll talk about later on in this video. Now, how many of these interviews should you do? Well, you probably want to start off with probably 3 per category or per profile that you have, like different customer segments. And then if you find demand specifically behind one of them, you want to probably have 5 or 10 additional interviews to kind of confirm that people are saying similar things. Now, one big problem with customer interviews is that people say one thing, but they do something completely different. All of us have this problem in life. So the second strategy to test and validate your startup idea is called the smoke test. So what is this? Why should we do it? And how do we actually do it? Well, the concept is that you build a landing page that really describes your offer as if you had built the entire product and company out and you were ready for customers to come and buy, because we're gonna use that to test people's actions on that page through what we call a CTA, a call to action. So a call to action could be a fake download button that shows us people would download this app if we had built it. It could be a fake buy button if we had a product that we were trying to sell. It could be a sign up for the wait list early on. The goal is to test people's actions instead of just their words. And we want to do this because most people build entire products, then launch them. They hear complete crickets, and worse than that, when they actually go out there and get customers to use the product, they've built the wrong product for that customer. And now it's so complicated to unbuild, rebuild, it's a pain in the neck, and we want you to avoid that. So we want you to build as close to a great product the first time, and then we know we're gonna have to adapt it, but at least we're way closer to the truth the first time around. So the value of building the smoke test is to generate the demand and have it lined up for when you actually launch the product, as well as building a product that is way closer to what the customer actually wants versus what we have in our head. But probably the most important part of this is really getting your offer right. So let's talk about how we want to structure that offer in a way that is enticing. Now, of course, to build this out, you're going to need a logo, you're going to need a color palette, and other things that have to do with branding and content. We'll talk about that in the next module. Right now, I want to focus in on the value proposition, which is essentially the offer, and how to structure that on a one-page website. Now, the first section you're going to have is called the hero section. And it's basically a section through which you are delivering the core promise. If you don't get any other parts of this right, you need to nail this part, because every single person who clicks and goes to your website sees this first page. Only about 50%, maybe 20% scroll to the bottom. So this section is all about the core promise. you're gonna have a main headline here that's probably 2, maybe 3 lines in large text. And this has to be the ultimate outcome. And you wanna write this in very plain English. Then you wanna have an image over here that's going to essentially help visualize the promise here. So it has to add to this, and this together is the promise. Now, another thing that you're gonna have as well is a subtext under this one here. This is gonna be smaller text, which is a little bit more focused on talking about the product and what it can do for people. So this is the actual promise, like the outcome with this, and then underneath it is the thing that delivers that outcome. So for example, at We Are No-Code, we teach people how to launch their startups. So this might be launch your startup with no code and AI, right? The end goal they're looking for is to launch their startup, right? Or build a revenue generating business with no code. And then here, I might have some of the elements that showcase what that looks like. So it might be some learning materials like the coaching sessions that we have. It might be some people, the community that people get access to, the discount. It might just be kind of a bundle package that's shown here. And then underneath, we talk about the description. So the description is basically talking about the product. So it's like the No Code Startup, which is the name of our program, is a online program for your customer, non-technical entrepreneurs to launch their startup cost effectively. So this is the most important thing that everyone will see. It is called, again, the hero section, and make sure that you get this right for your startup. Now, underneath the hero, there's the next section, which is the benefits section. So basically the benefits are kind of like the smaller outcomes that people get from using your product. Again, you are selling the outcomes. You are selling the benefits in using your product. You're not talking about features. You're not talking about your product. So the way I usually structure this, and this would come right underneath the hero section, would be essentially to have 3 of the benefits, right? I would have a little title, very concrete, just one quick line that explains what you would get. And then underneath, you could have an additional description if you wanted. So if we're talking about the outcome being launch your revenue generating business, then this first one could be test your idea cost effectively. This one could be something like build the first version of your app with no code tools. And this one would be learn proven strategies to get paying customers. Now we can get into the actual features, which are the things that are going to fulfill the benefits here. So this next one is features. So again, this section is going to be something a little bit similar. Usually I see it as, it could be just a couple of icons. It could be, let's say 6. It could be also 4 on one line. Similar structure, usually icons instead of illustrations, but you can pretty much choose what it is. You want to make it very simple so that people can really understand. Each one of these features has to link back to one of the benefits. Because remember, the features are only interesting to people because they're the actual things that allow people to get the benefits. And so again, we are selling benefits, we're selling outcomes. These are really to show them how we're going to deliver those. Now the next section might be a how it works. Not every single product needs this, but if it needs explaining, you might have to create a section for it. Basically this section I would create as just a simple section. It might be like 1, 2, 3, and it's like, you sign up, you connect your data, and then you basically, that data is organized for you, and you can check out your analytics. I don't know. This is basically just bring them through. Make it as simple as possible. People don't really know what you do. You need to make it as easy to understand as possible. You can also write underneath some subtext if you'd like. Again, not every single product needs a description of how it works, but I thought it was important to put it there. This comes underneath the features section. Afterwards, let's talk about what we are going to have right after that. Well, here we're actually going to have a section called CTA. Now, CTA is the call to action. Again, you have to determine which call to action you want to have. You want to have a whole section with a button that's going to be your CTA. A CTA is pretty much a button, right? There's going to be text, large text here. There's going to be a small description here of what people are clicking to get. So it's join today. It is sign up for the wait list. Honestly, I would go mainly for something that's going to prove there's demand. So basically buy or download the app. And then when people click on it, they actually go to the next screen, which is going to be like, you know what? If we had a buy button, it might say, right now we don't have stock. Sign up to be the first to receive a notification once we do. Or if it's an app, it's we are about to launch this. Make sure to be the first to get notified when we launch. And here's where we're going to capture their emails, and we're going to be able to get access to a first wait list of people who want to buy our product. Now the call to action should also be in the hero page underneath that little description that we talked about. So basically headline, description, underneath you have a little button as well. And you can have it in different parts of the smoke test, but make sure to keep the same CTA each time. Now, one thing I didn't mention here is that if you have any type of social proof, those could be testimonials, those could be people who have already committed to using this, partners, sponsors, then you might want to use them also in this. But a lot of people start off and they don't have that. That's why I didn't bring it up. Now in the next two sections, we're going to show you how to build a brand and to build a website like this one that we've just shown you without having any design or technical skills. But yes, your main goal with the smoke test is to get people to sign up, also to fine tune your offer and to understand which customers you're going after, if it seems like they're actually interested in this product through their actions. And yes, it's way easier to adapt your offer on a landing page than it is to rebuild your entire product. Now to test out this offer, you can also test out some paid ads, and literally learning how to structure your offer, build out a landing page, start testing the demand behind it is the difference between you just sitting back and doing nothing, being an idea person, and being an execution person who can take action every single time they have an idea. Now, before building out our smoke test, we need to come up with branding and content. So in the next section, I'm gonna teach you how to build a brand with no designers. How to build your brand without designers. This is probably one of the areas where people sink and waste the most time in the process of building their startup. They spend months finding the perfect name and buying endless domain names. They spend dozens of weeks trying to perfect that logo they have in mind, and usually spend thousands of dollars on trademarks, hiring designers, and this is exactly what I'm trying to save you from today. Now, the harsh reality is that people aren't gonna buy from you because you have a pixel perfect logo. They're gonna buy from you because you have a value proposition that solves the problem they're trying to solve, and that the solving of that problem is worth more to them than the actual price that they're paying for it. So your ultimate goal with the brand is to do something that is good and then to move on. And the great news in all this is that nothing is set in stone and final. At We Are No Code, we've changed our logo 3 different times. So instead of trying to make you a designer in this section, I'm gonna talk to you about a couple of tools that you can use to actually build the first version of the brand that you're trying to launch. And then I'm gonna give you some tips because I've seen so many people get this completely wrong. Now let's talk about what you need over here. Okay, so let's talk about the elements that you're gonna need to build out that first brand for the website. First thing is gonna be a logo. Now for the logo, honestly, my choice here would be to go to logomaster.ai. It's an AI tool that allows you to create logos, and then you can basically pick one that you think is nice, you can adapt it, and you can pay a small amount of money to get access to the high resolution versions of it. Another tool I like using is Looka, Looka, and this is another tool that will generate not only the logo, but then it can also use that logo and create all sorts of branding elements. And last but not least, Fiverr. And if you're going the Fiverr route, I would find a portfolio, find an exact logo that I like, and just get them to adapt that logo to your specific brand name. It's gonna be the easiest way to really get the outcome you're looking for quickly. And to be clear, the logo should not take more than 1 to 5 days to create. Logo, check. The second element you're gonna need is a color palette. What are the main colors? You really only need one core color and maybe 1 or 2 sub colors, but we wanna create a basic color palette. Color palette. 1L, 2Ls, 2Ts, I don't know. Here I would simply use a website called Coolers. The other thing you could do is to go to a website that you like and simply use the 2 or 3 colors that you find pretty inside their design palette. Now each color usually has a hex code, HEX. This is basically a code very specific to that tone of that color. And so you literally just want to have 3 different hex codes. One being the main color that you're gonna be using, Facebook, that would be blue, for example. And then you're gonna wanna have the 2 subcolors that you might use. So potentially if you're using a blue, you might use like a yellow, but you can go and check out websites that inspire you, and that's all we really have to do for a color palette. Keep it as simple as possible. It's gonna take a lot of time, and if you're not a designer, just choose one color. That's it, with white. Now copywriting. Now let's talk about the copy. We need to write copy behind everything that we do. Now the tools that I use for copywriting would be as follows. I would actually use Claude, which is just a competitor to ChatGPT. It is completely free as well. If you're using a tool like that, you're gonna wanna give it a role. For example, you are a copywriter who writes landing pages for marketing material. Then a goal, you're gonna write the hero section for my 1-page website, and then a specific set of instructions. Provide 1 headline and one subtitle. And of course, you want to provide it with all the details of what your company does. Now, the second tool that I really like to create copy is actually called Reloom. It's a components library, and with AI, it'll create the entire build out. We'll talk about this when we build the actual website, but what it does is it also copyrights. So it'll create a first version of the copy for the hero section for you simply by telling it what your company is. That's Reloom. And the final one, if you want to get a bit nerdier, is going to be copy.ai. But for many people, that's honestly a little bit overkill. So again, we just need to write a couple of sections here. Check. Now we're also going to need things like icons, illustrations, which are basically drawings. We're going to need pictures potentially if we want to use a lot of photography within our website. For this, there are so many existing bases that you can use. I use places like Icon 8 when it comes to icons and illustrations as well. For photography, I would go with Unsplash or Pexels. They have lots of free images that you can use for your website that are highly professional. And if you want to get a bit nerdier with all this, you can use AI. Obviously, it will be a little bit more technical, but I usually use things like Midjourney for visual elements. And yes, you'll find all the tools I'm talking about below inside of the description of this video. And those are pretty much all of the elements that you need to build a first version of your brand. Now, probably the most important here is to avoid perfectionism. You are going to find yourself fine-tuning. You have to realize that it doesn't really matter how perfectly you get all these elements, specifically the copywriting. Once you go and test this out, you're gonna get a much better idea. You're gonna learn from the market, and you're gonna wanna anyway adapt some of the things, the imagery, the copywriting, and other elements as well. And that can even include your logo too. The reality of this phase is that nothing is final, so don't be too worried. The main goal is not to get stuck in this phase. Now, if you're not a designer and you have a terrible eye for these kind of things, here are 3 key tips that have helped me. Number 1, if you don't know the color palette, stick to white with one color. Simplicity is always gonna beat overkill. Number 2, stick to only one style of illustrations on a landing page or website. So once you figured out the style you wanna implement, put that. If it's a 3D style, awesome. If it's literally stick figures, awesome. Just stick to one, because if not, it's gonna make it look a little incongruent. And the same thing stands for icons as well. Consistency matters. And probably the best tip here is to use existing templates of designs. Use style guides that already are out there so that you don't have to figure this thing out or which color goes well with which other one. You can simply use pre-created elements that are gonna be beautiful just to begin with. Now, the whole goal of this branding module is literally so you can build that smoke test or website. So let's talk about how we can do that with no code and AI. Okay, so how do you build your website with no code and AI? Now, for those of you who don't know what no code is, it's a set of tools that allow you to drag and drop to build websites and apps as well without writing a single line of code and without understanding coding language. There's code behind it, but you don't have to touch it. You can build beautiful things. Now, there are 2 conflicting ideas when we're building a website. One of which is that first impressions matter, so building something nice is important, but also nothing is perfect and it will always evolve, and this is a work in progress, so don't get too caught up with this. And it only takes looking at the first version of Airbnb's website to realize that, yes, you can build awesome companies even if your first website is not the best. So in this section, we're gonna keep it very simple, and instead of building out a huge website with lots of different sections, we're gonna really focus in on building that one-page website, which is the smoke test. And over time, you can build all sorts of things into it, like a booking system or potentially a blog, but let's keep it simple for now. Now, remember that at this point, people don't care about you, they care about themselves. So getting the offer right and what that offer can actually do for them is the most important thing. And I know we've already talked about this, but if you haven't checked it out, check out the beginning of this video where we jump into the structure. But if you missed it, check out the section about how to test out any startup idea. Now, for this process, I'll usually use some AI tools and then perfect everything in no-code tools. So I'll kick it off inside of Reloom. Inside of Reloom, you can pretty much put your one-line description. It's gonna actually create for you a full sitemap, which are basically the different pages. Again, we're just doing one page for this example. And then once you click on wireframe, it builds it out into individual sections. So as you can see from this example right here, you can see every single section being populated. And with this tool, you can recreate the sections that you had. Now, the most important thing here is that you are creating the structure and how it looks. You can adapt that. And then we're actually gonna wanna build it out. So if you were using Reloom, we can either choose to then push that Reloom wireframe inside of Webflow, which is a website builder. Now this is for slightly more technical people because Webflow does require a couple months to become very good at. If you want to keep it simple, you can definitely do it this way as well. The second tool I would recommend would be Card with 2 R's. It is very cheap to build out your website, and once you've created that wireframe, you have a good idea of the structure of your website. You want to build that structure in actual code, which is why we're going towards these no-code tools. Card is awesome. And it's very flexible, it's very easy to learn as well. And now if you already know that you're gonna build a web app behind this product, then you can start off with Softer if you'd like, because Softer will allow you to build the landing page, but then also you can use those learnings to be able to then build out a web app as well. Those are my recommendations, but honestly, there are thousands of website builders, and at this point, even email marketing tools allow you to build basic landing pages. And so the most important is for you to build out the actual structure that we've talked about earlier, and then to input all of the elements that you have inside the branding and content section. That pretty much means the copywriting that you might have from Reloom or from one of the other tools that we talked about. Then you're gonna wanna input the icons, illustrations. If you have photography, you're gonna wanna fine tune that call to action button. And when it comes to building out a website, there are 3 tips that really helped me along the way, and I wanna share these with you right now. The first tip I would recommend is to highly customize this to target your ideal customer profile or the person you think you're going after. Don't make your copywriting general, make it incredibly specific for that person. Have this thing feel like you're talking directly to them and not to kind of this broad audience. It's like, this is for yoga teachers in San Francisco who have this problem, and they feel understood. And this is something that's gonna connect with them a lot more than really broad and general text. And with that, you wanna make sure that you don't have jargon, that everything's written very simply, so very easy to understand. If there is specific jargon that has to do with that ideal customer profile that you're targeting, then it's okay to use words like that. For example, in the startup world, people kind of generally know what an MVP is. So if you were targeting people who are startup founders, you might call something an MVP. The second big tip I have for you is to learn how to build it out yourself. Because you're gonna have to change this website so many times as you change the offer, as you learn more about who your customer is, what the benefits are that they're looking for, having the knowledge to actually change it yourself will give you a lot of flexibility and control early on. Number 3 is do not strive for perfection. You will never reach it. It is okay for you to build something 80% of where you want it and then to launch it. And fourth, probably the most important point, is to start adapting your website or landing page to the customer and to the needs that they actually have. So the quicker you can fine tune this, the better it is gonna be at selling your product and your offer. And just to be clear, building your first website should definitely not take more than 2 to 7 days. If it takes you longer than that, you are probably stuck in analysis paralysis or perfectionism. And this is why in this next section, I wanna talk about the entrepreneurship mindset, how important it is for you to adopt this mindset if you wanna be successful as a startup founder. Now, probably one of the biggest differences that you're going to go through when you go from a 9-to-5 job to becoming a full-time entrepreneur is in your mindset. And I used to think the mindset was super fluffy, but as I've trained more and more founders, I realized how essential it is to get this part right so that you can really set yourself up to win in the long term. So I want to teach you how to build a solid mindset, because early stage building a startup, when you're going literally from I have an idea or no idea to first paying customers, it is completely different than having a 9-to-5. It's completely different than joining a startup in the early stages and helping them grow. And this stands for low-level employees, but also for very high-level executives. You see, when you're an executive at a high level, you have access to all these different teams, and you are basically a manager, right? If you have an issue or you need something from design, you can just call up a designer. If you need some help from marketing, call up marketing. You have all these resources and specialists that you have access to. And when you are building a startup, it's oftentimes just you and potentially one co-founder who are trying to do everything themselves with a very limited budget and usually not a huge amount of time either. So understanding how to operate in these two very different scenarios can be a change. The first big change has to do with going from being a specialist to having to learn the basics of several different skills to be able to get things off the ground. And then to be able to replace yourself in those areas once you have more time and resources. And so in those circumstances, learning how to become a beginner again and to accept that in entrepreneurship, you are a beginner and you have to learn all of these different things. This is actually gonna allow you to very quickly adopt this new mindset, adopt this new operating system so that you can be more successful. And so it's completely okay that you don't know a bunch of things, but all you have to do is add yet to the end of that sentence, and basically you start adopting this growth mentality. That, by the way, is pulled from a book called Mindset from Carol Dweck. And yes, believing that you can grow no matter where you are in your journey is so important so that you can adopt that beginner mindset, learn the skills you need, and then be able to launch startups from scratch. Now, I'm a big believer that entrepreneurship is a learned skill. Sure, some people are more extroverted and they might be better at going out there and doing sales. Some people might be better at building products than others, and some people have a higher tolerance for risk than others. But having trained more than 600 founders, I can tell you that it's more of a skill. And it's a skill that you can learn through action. And this leads us to a very important next point, is that in entrepreneurship, especially at these very early stages, you need to take action over perfection. So although in your day job, you might be so used to creating things to perfection, the best of your ability, this is actually something that's going to slow you down because of the simple Pareto principle, right? 20% of your effort is gonna get 80% of the outcome. So that last 20% from going to good to perfect is not worth your time in an early stage entrepreneurship. And that's because you're running a bunch of tests and things are constantly changing. And a lot of the work you're doing might have to be redone completely. So what's important is to take action, do tasks at 80% of your ability, and then move on to the next task, because there are gonna be many tasks that you have to do and you have no time to get lost in endless perfectionism. Now, one of the core reasons why this all happens is because for some reason in entrepreneurship, we take what we do as who we are. So if you create a task that is not perfect, that means that you are not perfect. If a product you launch is not amazing, then it means that you are not amazing. And if we detach our production from our identity, it suddenly gives us what we really need in entrepreneurship, which is a mentality of the scientist. We're just building things to test them out, see if they work out. If they do, perfect. We can invest more time in perfecting them over time, but usually there's gonna be a much more pressing task to go after next. So you are not your startup, and it's okay to deliver work at 80% of your capability. I'm telling you that now. You need to adopt this. Now, another big problem that early stage entrepreneurs have is that they are constantly lost in analysis paralysis, constantly doing research, constantly overthinking things, doing research, planning, and not actually executing towards their goal. And that's usually because they fall in love and engage in their vision, their dream, this large company, this amazing platform that they're gonna build that's gonna change the world, instead of focusing in on that one tiny task that they can do today that's gonna allow you to progress towards that end goal. And that's a huge mental shift, because we're always asked, what is your grand vision? What is this amazing business that you're gonna build? And all you really need to figure out at the moment is kind of have an idea of the direction that you're going, and then take the steps that will shine light onto the next steps. Meaning that right now, you don't know what you're gonna have to do in 3 months because you don't know the results of the experiments you're gonna do between now and then. And I love this quote that I heard, which is, it's easy to hide behind large visions and dreams. It is very difficult to hide behind small individual tasks. So spend more time figuring out the small tasks you can do instead of always obsessing over this grand vision and the strategy and the plan. Okay, now let's talk about marshmallows. Yes, this has to do with mindset. You see, there was a study that was done where they took a bunch of kids and they put one marshmallow in front of them. And they said, if you can wait 30 minutes without eating this marshmallow, then we will give you a second marshmallow. And then they tracked how successful these people were in their life. Now, interestingly enough, the group of kids that waited the 30 minutes to get the second marshmallow actually also ended up being much more successful in life. And that's because they learned how to delay gratification. And this is maybe the most important piece of advice for mindset within entrepreneurship. It's that the actions that you're taking today, you don't always see the result of them immediately. So engaging in immediate action and expecting the results of your actions to be shown in the future, AKA delaying gratification, is what's going to make you win over time. So be incredibly impatient in action, but also be very patient in results. Great businesses usually take about 2 years to build, 3 years to build, and they're actually sold after like 7 to 10 years. So be the entrepreneur that plays the long game, because it is in the long game that you can win really big. Learn the process, acquire the skills, and you're setting yourself up to have so many shots on goal that it's almost impossible that you not succeed in entrepreneurship. However, if you expect immediate results, you will be disappointed, and unfortunately, this is probably not made for you. Now, one of the most amazing quotes I want to leave you with right now is as follows: the magic you are looking for is in the work you are avoiding. Now, this is so important for entrepreneurship because oftentimes we have to do things that we don't want to do. The obstacle is the path. And oftentimes we don't want to do things that are uncomfortable. But this is literally what we have to do. So if we are more of a builder, a programmer, we're going to have to learn how to do some sales, to talk to customers. If we're more of a salesperson, we will have to learn how to do some of the building, especially early stage, or at least to be able to manage our own stack and adapt it to product market fit. So whether you're at the beginning of your journey or deep in the entrepreneurship trenches, remember that the magic you are looking for is in the work you're avoiding. And with that, let's jump into the next section. Okay, so let's talk about how to build your first app or MVP with no-code tools. Now, every time I speak to entrepreneurs, they oftentimes have a mountain of different features that they're trying to fit into the first version of the app they release. And this usually makes them build products that look a little bit like this one. But it's so important to know that the first product you launch, the product that can get you to millions of dollars in revenue, usually looks something like this. So stop building out a million features and focus on delivering value to your customer. Customers pay for the value your product delivers, not the product itself. In fact, customers don't care about your blockchain technology, your AI, your machine learning. They really care about the outcome that this can provide for them. And so the number one goal is to build the smallest product which delivers the most amount of value or outcome to your customer. Now, because we know that your first app is not gonna be your last and that it's a work in progress, and that we also know we're gonna have to adapt it to the market realities, we need to launch this product yesterday. And in the wise words of Paul Graham, who's the founder of Y Combinator, if you don't feel uncomfortable about the first product you launch, you are launching too late. So let's talk about the right and the wrong way of building an MVP. Okay, so if we're trying to solve the transportation problem, here is the wrong way of building your MVP. Why is that the case? Well, because as you can see, the first iteration is 2 wheels. It doesn't actually get you from one place to the other quicker. The half of a car doesn't either, and you literally have to spend a bunch of money to build the car, so only the last iteration of this product solves the problem and people are willing to pay for. However, this over here is the correct way to build a startup, because as you can see, building a skateboard is going to be a very first version that solves the problem. It's quicker than walking. A bicycle is going to be quicker than the product before it. And then we build a car afterwards. Now we can charge more and more over time for improving the product and for delivering the better and better outcome, right? But each one of these products allow you to generate money and it solves the actual problem. And this is the approach that you want to take when you're building your MVP. So let's talk about the steps we have to do to build this MVP. There are actually 3 key questions that we have before we even start building. Number 1 is, what is the outcome that the customer wants? So, for example, if our product is Airbnb, the outcome is a rented house. If the product is an analytics platform, then the outcome is a report and insight. And if the product is a dating app, going on a date is the outcome that people are paying for. They don't care if it's an app. The thing they care the most about is the ultimate outcome. And figuring out how to deliver that outcome with the fewest features to build is your job. So number 2 is figuring out the minimum number of features that you need to be able to build out that MVP or deliver the outcome, right? And part of it could be a software product. Another part of it could also be done manually at first. There was a great startup that delivered maid services at your home, and all you did, you logged in and you basically sent through a request, and the founders would actually just then text one of their maid services and see if they were available, send them to destination, send a confirmation by text to the customer. And it was a smart way to build a minimal front end and then have a back end that was manually managed. And then, of course, they built out that back end to be able to manage way more people booking. This is really the kind of thing that we're looking for early on. Because remember, outcome equals money. And this is the ultimate validator of your startup. And step 3 is, which tools do we have to choose, right? To be able to build out the features that deliver the outcome. Now, for this, we're gonna be talking about a couple of tools here. I'm gonna bring you through the process, and don't worry, none of these tools require you to be a technical person or have programming skills to be able to build. They're all, again, gonna be built with these drag and drop app builders called no-code tools. Now, once you figure these things out, the first step is going to be to have a wireframe built, or basically a flowchart. The wireframe are all of the different screens that you think this app or this product is going to need and the flowchart is how they connect to each other. You can literally build these out on a napkin right now or a piece of paper with a pen that just organizes your ideas in the way that you see this working out. There are also a couple of AI tools that are very valuable and it'll save you probably a lot of time. I use a tool called Galileo.ai, and it allows you to actually build out design screens based on a single prompt. And there's also another tool called UIZard or Wizard that allows you to do a similar thing on the design front. Now, if you don't know how a flowchart works or how to create a wireframe, then you can literally do two things. You can ask ChatGPT to actually draw one out for you. You can also go and Google it and just find an example of an existing flowchart and then just adapt it to what your app does. And because with no-code tools, you can build these things out relatively quickly, what's important in this preparation phase is to really get everything down on paper and mapped out so you can have better preparation for when it comes to building it out. Now, I've helped more than 600 people build out their apps with no code and AI, and this is why I'm just gonna give you some of the tool sets that I think will be a good fit for you. Now, if possible, and if you don't have a lot of experience building out apps, then I highly recommend that you build the first version of your MVP leveraging Softer as a front end or building all the design side, and then Airtable, which stores all of the data, or in other words, your database. And the reason why I recommend this stack is because it is easier to learn and it can also build out deeper functionalities than just a website. Now, if you're a total beginner, but you're looking to build something that's a little bit more of like a mobile app, then I would highly recommend you check out Glide. It doesn't actually go into the iOS and Android store, but it has a really good web experience and it's a very easy tool to learn. Now, if your app absolutely requires for you to have deeper functionalities, do all sorts of API calls, and has more complicated workflows, then you probably want to consider one of two tools. The first one is Bubble. And the second one is Flutterflow. Now, heads up here, these platforms usually take about 3 to 6 months to get good at before you can build a solid version of your first app. But with that learning curve will come more flexibility and power. So now let me give you some tips that are gonna fast track your journey. Number one, build a simple software product and then do some of the things that are more complicated manually at first, just for the couple first customers. So you can get a much better idea of how that thing actually has to be built out. And if something doesn't work, you can easily adapt it instead of unbuilding everything that you've created. Your goal is to get as quickly as possible to revenue because that's what tells you that you're really on the right path. Number two, expect to be wrong with the first product that you build. Why? Because most people are so in love with their ideas that they can't and don't have the ability to actually shift and pivot towards the market's demand. Instead, learn how to build that first product yourself so that you have full control. You're never gonna be a slave to programmers' bills over and over and over, and you can control and find product market fit over time. This is where learning no-code tools and startup methodology is so powerful. It makes you a self-reliant entrepreneur, and it ultimately allows you to have more shots on goal. Now, the final thing is that founders put way too much emphasis on the launch of their product. They think Leonardo DiCaprio is gonna show up and everyone's gonna be cheering champagne glasses and everyone's gonna come and be so excited about their product. Guess what? I hate to break it to you, but no one cares. In fact, Airbnb launched like 4 times before they were successful. So what's more important is for you to get the product in front of the first couple of customers, get feedback, and improve it for the next couple customers. And that is how you should launch your MVP. But a product is nothing without a business model, which is why in this next section, we're gonna be talking about how to select the right one for your business. Okay, so let's talk about how to pick the right business model for your startup. Now, you'll be surprised to know that there are actually only 14 proven business models in the digital world. So all you really have to do is listen to this section till the end and select one which you think has the highest likelihood of being the one for you. Then we're gonna go out there and test it and move on. If we're right, we're gonna double down. If we're not, we're gonna select a different one. And I say that because you should only have one business model to launch your startup. Sure, when you've generated millions of dollars, you can have more than one. And actually at scale, it's proven that there are usually about 2, but your ability to make money with one is the most important thing for you in these early stages. So let me break down each for you right now and give you a short example. The first one is services or fee for service. So this one is very simple. A consulting firm, for example, they provide you with services and you pay for those services. You're either charged on a per project basis, which is usually the case, or sometimes it's hourly. Number 2, commerce, selling physical or digital products, right? You buy them for a certain price, you sell them for a certain price, you make your money in between. Relatively simple. let's move on to the next. The third one is what many software businesses use, which is a subscription. You pay a monthly fee to get access to a service. This could be something like Netflix, or it could be something like your CRM. And one of the great things about this is that you get recurring revenue. So it's obviously a very popular model. Number 4 is something that is so popular now that AI has become the next big thing, and it is metered services. So you basically pay per usage, right? You have a certain number of tokens, and that's what you get access to. And if you want more, you gotta pay more. But this is the same thing as buying servers from AWS, for example. It's basically you pay for the amount that you use. And yes, you charge people more than what it costs you to run. Number 5, productized services. This is basically when you take what usually is a manual services-based business and you create products that are able to deliver the value of those same services online. Moz is a great example of this business model. And in fact, when building with no code, so many of our students are trying to do that, right? They have skills and now they want to charge people for those skills and build it into a product. It's basically taking know-how and services-based businesses, turning them into products that are more scalable. Number 6 is a transaction fee. So exactly in the same way that Airbnb does it, right? You charge someone, you basically help a transaction take place, and then you just take a cut of that transaction. So it could also be like Kickstarter, right? Take a 5 to 15% fee. Number 7, lead generation. But basically here's where you acquire leads and you sell them to other providers. So basically like creditcards.com. You can either charge per lead or you can also charge for any lead that was closed. Number 8 is games. So it's basically either in-game purchases or actually purchasing the game itself. A good example of this is Fortnite, for example, the very popular video game. Then there's marketplaces, which for me is the same as transaction fees, right? You connect a buyer and a seller and you take a commission. So think of like eBay, for example. Number 10 is ads. So just like Google, you basically sell ad placement for companies to market their products. 11 is called new media, and it's basically having a viral effect. So this for me is not really a business model, but it's like it definitely, if you have lots of people and there's huge growth like WhatsApp, then obviously you have some power because you have a lot of users. Number 12 is combinations. So you might have a subscription fee and then you also have services. I would call this kind of having 2 business models, but hey, who am I? Number 13 is big data, basically selling people's information online. Number 14 is licensing. Like Microsoft sells its licenses, which is basically the right to use their intellectual property. And at this point, if it's not so clear which one is a good fit for you, you should actually just go to ChatGPT and ask it, describe your company and tell it to give you the right business model for what you are trying to accomplish. So the main advice here is don't be creative. Use one of these and just implement it in your business. And please, please, please only have one business model to start. Okay, now in this next section, we're gonna be talking about how to sell. So in this section, let's talk about how to sell. Selling is probably the single most important skill that every single entrepreneur should learn. And no matter what business you are starting, you need to learn it to have control of your company. But I know a lot of you might think, hey, I'm not really a sales guy, because you have that idea of the used car salesman guy. But in this section, I'm gonna teach you why you don't have to become an aggressive salesperson to be able to close great business. You see, putting the right offer in front of the right person at the right time is ultimately what closes deals. And suddenly you don't have to push your product onto people. People sell themselves into your product. But you need to understand a lot of the different mechanisms that go in the buyer journey to be able to sell effectively. And going through the experience of selling yourself early on will literally teach you how to build every single part of your business. Because guess what? All the objections that you're getting while you're selling are gonna be things that you have to include in your marketing material, on your website. All the outcomes and the benefits people are looking for, again, you're gonna discover through the sales process, and you're gonna focus on those talking points when you go out and try to sell. But because a lot of people don't like this topic, I'm gonna start off with some difficult stuff. Let's say that you have to do actual sales, in-person sales. Well, let me break down this very simple framework. It's actually Alex Hormozy's, if you know him. It's the closer framework. And you're gonna see that it's actually not that difficult, and you can do it even if you are an introvert. And even if you're not a fan of Alex, this is useful information to have. Now, this is actually a question-based framework, which basically means that you're asking a bunch of questions and you're not necessarily going hard on the pitching side of things. So the C stands for clarify. So you can ask your prospect questions like, what brought you to this call today? What is your goal? They're basically gonna explain to you what their problem is. The L over here stands for label. So as soon as you know the problem, you wanna really label the problem. So labeling, you basically repeat what the person says. So I understand that your problem seems to be this X, right? Or it sounds like your goal is this, correct? Now, once they say yes, you know that is the pain. Now, before we actually present a solution and try to solve their problem, we need to understand the pain itself, right? So O is overview of past pain. So questions like, what have you tried so far? How long have you been doing that for? Is that working out for you? Things like that. Basically, it brings them back into a little bit the pain that they're currently feeling, and it sets you up really well to go in and start selling your solution. So here we basically want to just focus on the 3 benefits. So the 3 outcomes that people are actually looking for in using your product and kind of explaining why this will be able to solve the past pains that they've had. Then E is explain the concerns away. These are basically all around objections, right? When you try to sell something, people have all these objections around the product that you're trying to sell. And this is where you address all of these objections. So usually it's too expensive, I need to consult someone else. And what you want to do here is reframe the way that they're thinking about that specific concern. And then once you've actually closed, it comes to the R down here, which is to reinforce their decision. So now they've bought, and you want to reinforce the decision that they've made so they can feel good about their decision. So for example, when people join our program, I will actually send each person an individual video personalized to what they're trying to accomplish to help them be able to drive the outcome that they're looking for. A handwritten note is something that you could do. You could send them a box with swag inside of it. There's lots of options that you can use, but with selling, the most important thing is the insight that you get from selling, which are things that are gonna allow you to build an amazing business, right? Because ultimately, you're understanding the problems, the solutions that people are looking for, and hopefully you're building a product that actually solves this problem too. And by the way, don't expect to be the best at this at first. Go out there and start selling, and then you basically fine tune from there. Again, action over perfection. You can perfect these things over time. And one thing that's really stuck with me is that people make purchasing decisions emotionally, but then they justify them logically. So make sure that the way that you sell your product is based on the outcomes, because that's going to get a person in a good emotional state to be looking for that solution. And then you're gonna be able to close the deal by addressing logically all the concerns that these individuals have. And both of those together can be very powerful. But now that you know the basics about selling, how do you actually get those first paying customers, right? Well, we're gonna talk about that in the next section. Getting your first paying customers is something that is completely different than building scalable marketing strategies, which we're gonna be talking about in the next section. But everything that you'll be implementing in building scalable strategies are things that you are learning in this first step. And one of the best quotes here is that early on in startups, you are doing things that are not scalable because it provides you with the insight that you need to be able to build out scalable processes. Now in startups, when we talk about sales, we really talk about first 100 customers. How do you find them? But then also, how do you actually sell to them? And if right now you're thinking, well, I don't know how to reach my customers, then it doesn't even matter if you build this whole business out. If you're not able to reach them, you're gonna be in the same situation once you've built out this entire product anyway. Why? Because people will not just come flooding towards your product. You will have to actively go out and find those first customers. And usually it's a very manual process, but again, it's gonna allow you to create amazing scalable systems later. Now, the first customers that you will ever get will most likely come from the same group of people that you talked to during the customer discovery journey. You see, when you were doing customer interviews, you were having a conversation where you were asking people about their problems, but guess what you were also doing? You were building a relationship with these people, and potentially at the end of that interview, you talked a little bit about what you were trying to solve with your startup. So basically, these people are going to be the first people that you go back to once you have a solution to the problem that they've expressed that they have. And that's why customer interviews usually builds a relationship, it becomes customer development, and these people will probably be the first people to test it out and to help you shape the product as well. And then they will most likely also be your first sales. And this is really the goal of customer discovery. It's lining up people as well who are going to be your first paying customers. And if you remember back to when we talked about the smoke test, well, you've built out a list of potential future customers. And now is the great time to be able to put that list to actual good use. So at this point, you can basically send an email to all of your early adopters, and you can have a early bird special for these people. So you could run a campaign saying, hey, for the next 2 weeks, this is gonna be 50% off. After that, the prices will be regular. But thanks so much for being the first people to believe in us, and you get this discount. And then also make sure to close the deal after that time. And remember that this is only the very first step, because once you deliver the product, then you're going to generate some revenue and you're gonna start iterating on top of that. So at this point, you want to shift your attention from actually improving your product and services for the customers who are paying instead of just people who say, oh, this is interesting. Now, of course, you're not just going to depend on the people that you have lined up already. We're going to continually do outreach at this point. And this is where I use the same strategy as we used in the outreach for the customer discovery. I would do direct messages and adding people on LinkedIn who fit the customer profile. I would send them highly personalized messages. There are actually tools that can do that with AI. You'll be able to find them below. I would go back to those groups. I would find in-person meetups or conferences where these people hang out to be able to go out there and start promoting my product. You could also choose to release on Product Hunt, or I think it's called Beta List, and basically promote your product to existing customers on those platforms who are looking for cool new products. And I want to double down that in-person is actually the cheat code these days. If you're just willing to go where these people hang out and meet them in person and have conversations with them, then you actually get direct access to that customer base. Now, when you go out there and start selling to these first couple customers, there are two main things that you want to do to improve this process. Number one is to classify the kind of customer that this is, right? So you have all these buckets. Hopefully you've selected your ICP, but sometimes the people you're selling to are outside of this ICP. We need to make sure that we are targeting the right person with the right message, meaning that you should have a conversation with each one of these individuals, and you should understand if they are actually the target customer who you believe to be the one you should be going after. The second piece of advice is to go after a couple channels at first. Try a couple different things. The first thing that you try will probably not work. You can pretty much count on it. So have a couple different strategies on how you expect to get your first paying customers. Then once you start selling, you want to basically A/B test. You want to fine tune the message that you're putting out there. Potentially the main message is what is that outcome or promise that you're delivering? Also, what are the key 3 benefits that you're promoting? You might find through selling to the first 3 to 5 people that people are super excited about 1. Right? In that case, you might want to start with that one. And when it comes to the outreach and response rate, you want to A/B test your subject lines and the messages that you send out. Make them highly personalized. Don't make yourself seem like one of those LinkedIn people who's just like, hey, how's it going? Buy from me. No one wants that. And also remember that you are after feedback almost more than you are after revenue at this point, because that feedback is going to allow you to fine-tune this to generate a lot more revenue down the line and create scalable marketing strategies. So that's what we're going to be talking about in the next section. In this section, we're going to be talking about how to create a scalable marketing strategy. Now, I can tell you from experience that most entrepreneurs think they are at a growth or a scalable growth phase when in fact they haven't figured out the fundamentals behind it. And oftentimes that leads to people spending $5,000 towards marketing agencies who, guess what? They won't be able to actually help you unless you've figured out those fundamentals. And unless you have product market fit, you're gonna have so much market friction in marketing your product that frankly, it's gonna cost you 2 to 3 times the price to acquire just 1 customer. And there are 5 main questions that you have to be able to answer before you are ready for scalable growth strategies. Because you see, this phase is really about going from product market fit to product channel fit, which means that we are now figuring out what channels of distribution are gonna be the best to invest our time in selling our product. So the first thing you need to figure it out is who is the customer and what is their problem. If you haven't figured this out, I wouldn't try the scale. In other words, who is your ideal customer profile that we've discussed earlier inside this video. The second is that you have a product that delivers the outcome that you promise inside your pitch, or at least partially. If you don't have this, you shouldn't scale. Number 3, you have gone through the manual selling process and you know exactly how to structure your offer, meaning you know the desired outcome, you understand the benefits and you have tested those, and you also know how to handle objections. So the third one is your offer. You have to have that solid before you jump into scalable marketing strategies. And I put it in bold because it's super, super important. If you don't know what to talk about in the pitch, then you won't know what to have on marketing copy. You won't know what to have on a landing page that you send people towards. And even if you get in front of the right people, remember that if you don't have the offer down, you won't convert those into paying customers, because you, a lot of the times in scalable marketing strategies, will not be in the room to pitch your product. Number 4 is the decision-making process. If you don't understand the process for someone discovering your product to buying it, then you will not understand your sales cycle. And if, for example, from the first time someone discovers you to the point at which they buy it takes 6 months, well, you can very easily go broke investing a lot of money in scalable marketing strategies. And number 5 over here is to have a proven business model. So a business model that you have tested, you're already generating revenue from, because now we're gonna be able to make a calculation. the cost of acquiring a customer versus the amount that we can make from a customer. And that's usually calculated in the following way. What is the cost of acquisition? So this is called CAC, cost of acquisition. And then is that higher than the lifetime value, which is the amount that you can make from one customer over a given number of years, which is usually 5 years. If you can't make a profit between both of these, then you are running a money hole, my friend, and you are not ready to scale. Okay, so now let's say that you do have the answer to all of the questions I've just put on the board. Well, then we're ready for scalable growth. Now, what does that mean and how do you reach that? The idea here is to create a predictable process to convert someone from a lead to a paying customer. And early on in the process, you probably want to focus on a couple of different revenue streams. Why? Because some revenue streams have quicker return on investment and others take longer to implement, so they take longer to actually work. And in the early days of your startup, you actually don't have that much time. You have to generate revenue pretty quickly. So for example, direct sales, well, it gets you direct sales, so it's very quick return on investment. Whereas something like SEO marketing, for example, might be something that takes 3 to 6 months to actually start bringing in leads. So understanding that sometimes you just need very quick return on investment marketing strategies. And then once we have these revenue streams, we can start investing in longer term return on investment strategies like content marketing, SEO strategy, and things of that nature. Now, an investor called Andrew Chen talks about this concept that early on you want to focus on smaller, very specific audiences, meaning that your offer is super relevant, but that there aren't that many people to target in that specific smaller area. Why? Well, because larger businesses are actually not usually focused on these smaller opportunities. And this is often something that early stage entrepreneurs could take advantage of. So you could invest your time into newsletters that are really specifically catered to your needs. So he recommends going after these smaller opportunities. So for example, event marketing is one of them. Another one you could use is niche influencer marketing. You could also invest and start sponsoring certain newsletters that are very specific to the niche that you're in. And so you're going after a smaller number of highly targeted people. And when we talk about scalability, it is basically in the ability to predict, hey, if I invest X amount sponsoring this newsletter, and this newsletter has this click-through rate, and these specific people usually convert at X amount, and I can make X amount of money from them, now we know how much each customer is worth to you, meaning that we know how much we can invest on the front end in marketing. And once we find marketing strategies that allow us to pull a profit from the difference between the cost of acquisition and the amount we can make from that customer, now we can start investing $1 because we know that 2 is coming out of the other end. So my advice to you today is that stick to quick return on investment opportunities early on, and then over time you can start investing in those long-term opportunities. The other thing is that you want to test a couple out early on. So some that I would recommend would be direct sales. I would test out event marketing. I would test out paid ads and creating a basic funnel for paid ads, see if we can turn a profit on that funnel. And then niche sponsorship. So it could be, newsletter sponsorship, it could be influencer sponsorship. And once you find one of these channels that work, you really want to double down on it. If you can turn a profit from this, we can now scale that up. So if it's events, then you can start showing up in more events. If it's paid ads, you can start putting more money dedicated towards investing in paid ads. And then make sure to create a system around this distribution channel. And I would always advise for you to slowly test other channels as well, because sometimes you will find a channel out of the blue that it performs a lot better than the one that you started with. And once we find that, we want to invest as much of our time and energy in that distribution channel. Because your goal, yes, it's to find the cheapest customers that you can close the quickest. And because this is directly connected, we're going to be talking about how to use no-code automation to be able to scale your operation. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to use no-code automations to scale your business. Okay, so once you've figured out the fundamentals of your business, it's now time to create processes to scale those and use automations to automate things. Why? Well, because there are so many repetitive tasks that you might be doing over and over and over. And for you to be able to avoid those tasks, you can create automations. Now, what's an automation? Well, it follows the basic theory of if this, then that. Let me explain. Okay, so the basic theory of if this, then that is basically provoked by these two things. If this takes place, then that will take place, right? So to really start this whole process off, we have triggers, and these triggers, what they do is, well, they trigger a specific action. So for example, if someone fills out this form, I want it to send this information to my email marketing tool. If someone books a time on my calendar, I want it to send an email automatically to that person with information I want them to review before that. If a new lead comes in, I want it to update my CRM. If a payment for a new product comes in, I want it to trigger people into the onboarding flow. And there are thousands of examples of this that already work within existing apps that you currently use. Now, to create these actual automations, there are really two key platforms that I recommend here. The first one is called Make, so that is make.com, and the other one is called Zapier. These are both similar platforms in terms of what they actually do. And I actually use both in my business to automate different things. And both of these allow you to create the triggers and then have actions take place when those triggers are triggered. And yes, they have integrations to more than 6,000 different apps. So basically, any app that you currently use, it could be Gmail, it could be HubSpot, it could be Stripe as a payment processor, it could be your email marketing tool. All of the tools that you currently use can probably use a huge amount of automation. Now, there are actually three things that I would implement if I were you leveraging these automation tools. The first one would be a sales pipeline, right? So basically a sales system similar to Pipedrive, which would go from a lead all the way to a closed customer. And then I would create a lot of automations behind it. So for example, you could have a situation where someone is jumping on calls in Zoom. You could record that actual transcript of the Zoom call. Then you could actually tap into ChatGPT with an automation, and you could have it write a personalized message following up, and you could send it through Gmail automatically as well, all through automation. The second thing I would do is marketing automation, right? So marketing automation would basically mean when a new lead comes in, it would either go to the sales team or we would nurture it in an email marketing sequence. I would have all of the data live inside of Airtable, and then I would just create different bases for each different management tool that I'm trying to replace. The benefits in this is just really having something that's absolutely curated to your needs. And the awesome thing is that with automations, you can also tap into AI. So you could have a trigger that says, once something happens, I want you to go and ask ChatGPT to do X, Y, or Z. So really the possibilities here are endless, but ultimately no code, AI, and automation can create incredibly scalable systems that allow you to repeat the same things without putting in all the hard work. And the biggest implication here is that you can have one person in your team do the same as 3 people. So if you have one salesperson and you create a system personalized to your sales process, then you could have that person deal with 2 to 3 times the number of leads. But remember, processes are created for people. So make sure that that process is first of all tested, and then adapt your system around the people who are using them. This is the reason why creating a customized system to your team is so important. Okay, so in this next section, we're gonna talk about how to accelerate your business leveraging AI. So as you've probably seen, over the past 6 to 12 months, we've seen an explosion of AI tools that were kind of set off by the launch of ChatGPT. Now, at this point, one big thing I'm realizing is that so many people end up in deep rabbit holes playing around with thousands of tools. And when it's all said and done, they literally have not used it to progress in their goal. That's right, they're just stuck in shiny object syndrome and in analysis paralysis because there are so many tools to choose from. So for this section, I want to do something a little different. I'm gonna be talking about the different tools that I like to use and I recommend for the different stages of building a startup. And also, I'm gonna be breaking down some of the common pitfalls that you need to avoid so that you can use some of these tools in your favor. A lot of the tools that you know require prompting, and understanding prompting correctly means the difference between something that is very well trained and doing things exactly the way you want them and something completely faltering. So let's talk about the 3 important things when you are prompting. So prompting tools are like ChatGPT, Claude 2, and oftentimes when you're creating custom GPTs or if you're creating custom models that you want to act in a certain way, we need to prompt them, right? So let's talk about the 3 most important steps for prompting, because this is going to help you in general. Now, the first thing we want to do when we prompt, so let's say we're using ChatGPT, is to give it a role. Now here we're going to use prompts like act like a, and you might say SEO copywriter. Giving your AI a role is super important, and I usually get very specific about this. So I might say something like, you are a sales manager with 20 years experience, structuring teams, writing scripts, specifically for B2B sales. And I can even tell it it's trained on a specific type of sales system. So for example, I could say spin selling, which is a methodology. So the second thing we have to do is give it a goal. So here you want to be quite specific. You are going to write a first version of a sales script for a company that does XYZ. And you're essentially going to usually be feeding it a certain amount of information as well. So if you say, here are some past call recordings, and you're gonna be training it on those past call recordings so that it can optimize that script, then that's gonna be super valuable. But ultimately, you wanna give it that goal and be specific. And then the third thing you wanna do is to provide it with very specific set of instructions. The more specific, the better. So as you know, with ChatGPT, for example, you could upload all the transcripts directly. You could upload images like PDFs that have training documentation that you already have in your company. You could upload some information about the company itself, or you could simply provide a short text about that. The more data that you're gonna feed it, and the more specific you are in all three of these, the role, the goal, and the instructions, well, the better the outcome. And then guess what? You're anyways gonna need to test the outcome and to fine tune your instructions throughout this entire process. So if you're just using a simple tool like ChatGPT, make sure to be better at prompting. The better you get at prompting, the better outputs you're gonna get. And ultimately, you're gonna be able to now use ChatGPT for much better things. And so for example, if I were to ask for it to write an email for me, I might say, you are an email copywriter with 10 years of experience writing emails for marketing purposes. Your goal is to write a 3 email sequence that I'm going to be sending to my customers to be able to nurture them. You could even provide more context and say, after those 3 emails, I will be sending through an offer. And then specific instructions. I would like you to build these 3 emails around 3 main objections that we're getting from these customers. And then you could ask for it to copy your tone and say that it should reference the examples of previous emails that you've written to be able to copy that tone. And then you're gonna have a first version to work from. And this is important because it's gonna give you a result that's closer to what you need. And then again, use it as an assistant. You'll be able to fine tune that email. You're gonna have saved a bunch of time and you can put your final touches on it and then you can launch it. And that brings us to a very important point is that AI right now is an amazing assistant. Don't expect for it to be perfect. So if you use it as an assistant, you're gonna be happily surprised. If you try to replace employees, then you're probably gonna be a little disappointed. So now let's talk about a couple tools that you can use in the different phases of launching your SaaS business. The first one is customer discovery. For this, basically, we are doing interviews with customers. So we could use ChatGPT, for example, to create a first version of the interview. You could train it and prompt it and say, hey, you are a customer discovery professional. You need to write a first set of interview questions. Here is the customer that we're targeting. You can also use ChatGPT or Claude AI to be able to write an outreach message that you can then use once you start contacting people. You're gonna wanna do direct outreach to these people, usually through platforms like LinkedIn, and having that first message that you can then A/B test will see how many interviews you can actually book. Once you've actually booked the interviews, I highly recommend that instead of trying to scramble and take notes during the interview, you just use a tool like Zoom has its own AI assistant that can basically just give you a summary and also the full script of the conversation. I would also record it. You can also use a tool like Otter.ai, which is kind of a more complex note taker, and that can provide you with those notes. And the reason for that is because the last part of customer discovery interview is analyzing the data to see what are people saying? What is the general consensus? And once we have notes of those interviews, we can then feed them into an AI and ask it questions about that data to try to extract some insight, which is ultimately what we're after. Now, step 2 is branding and content. Usually what I will do is not even use AI, I'll use existing elements out there. I've talked about those like Icon 8, Unsplash. But if you wanted to create some of these things like images, illustrations from scratch, I highly recommend for image generation that you use Midjourney. It's probably the most powerful. You do need to learn how to prompt it quite well. For the copywriting, I would focus on a tool like Copy AI, or I would simply use something like ChatGPT or Claude 2. Again, make sure to use that prompting system that we've talked about earlier. For the logo and branding, you could use a platform called Looka, Looka.ai. You could also use Logomaster.ai to create a quick logo. Again, we're trying to create something good, not perfect. Then we're gonna wanna build out a website with AI. So if you have absolutely no experience, you can use a tool like Framer AI, which is pretty powerful. You can also use another tool like Reloom to create the kind of wireframe in different sections. And then you could push that into Webflow, which is a no-code tool. again, that'll allow you to build out a very beautiful website in just a couple of minutes. And frankly, you don't have to always go the AI route to build your website. I would also use a simple and cheap tool like Card if you're just trying to get your first version off of the ground. Now for sales and outreach, I would use a tool that I'm gonna have in the link to be able to automate some of your outreach in LinkedIn. And there are many tools like Clay or Persona if you wanna do this. They're a little more complex and expensive, but that's another option. Now let's talk about building out your first software platform. There are no-code tools that allow you to build out first versions with AI. So you could use a platform like Softer.ai to build a very first basic web app. You could use a platform like Buzzy.ai to build out a mobile app or also a kind of web app. These are pretty cool tools. You can build certain functionalities, many others you can't. So if you can't do that, then you might want to check out first design tools. So here I would recommend two. One is called Galileo. The other one is called UIZard. That's gonna allow you to create the different screens and to showcase how you would organize those screens. Then I would jump into an actual no-code builder to build those out. So you could use a platform again like Softer and Airtable. You could use Flutterflow, you could use Adalo. There are many no-code tools out there that you can use that have plenty of AI sort of features inside of them. And no, don't expect to build out your entire app just with one prompt in AI yet. Right now, the two first platforms I talk about are the first ones that are really going in this direction. But right now you're gonna need to build things inside of no-code builders or eventually with full code if you're also trying to do that. Now, there's an entire other category of tools which are AI agents, right? You can create either sort of chat bots or you could create sort of voice agents that can have all sorts of very specific roles. For voice agents, I usually use Synthflow, or you could also use platforms like Air.ai. For more chatbot, you have very specialized ones. So if you were trying to get rid of customer support, you could use something like Aidebase. You could also create custom GPTs. You could have things like Chatbase. But with all these tools, the truth is that you just need to identify what your actual goal is. Like, are you having an actual problem, right? Like, what are you trying to solve first? Because oftentimes people are just checking out all these cool tools. They're like, oh, this is fun. But like, the truth is they just get lost in tools, pay a bunch of subscriptions, and then they don't really get anything done. For that not to be you, I highly recommend that you first identify, okay, what is my goal? Then what kind of tool am I looking for to be able to solve that? Then check out a couple options, select one. There will always be newer, cooler ones coming out. If you could just master one, it's gonna save you a bunch of time. And instead of testing 1,000 things and then regularly really just using nothing, then it makes a lot more sense for you to literally just learn one or two or maybe 3 AI tools that can help you on a daily basis, because that's gonna save a lot of time and money for you. And the final tool I'll recommend here, which is what replaces for me ChatGPT, is called Perplexity.ai. And the reason for that is because it's better at doing fine-tuned searches for me, and it also gives me the sources for all of those specific things that it's found online, which is great because I can then click through and see the actual source that it's used to be able to draft that conclusion. Another question I get often is, how do you incorporate AI inside one of your software builds, right? Inside your product, it could be an app, it could be a website. There are 3 main ways that we can do that. I'm gonna show you this right now on the board. Now, the first way to incorporate AI into one of your tools is to actually just go through the tool itself. So that's in the tool. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, you could use a agent builder to be able to build an AI agent trained on the material that you feed it. So you basically go in, they have features for you to basically build out the AI, and you build out your AI. Now in no-code tools, for example, sometimes you also have the ability to simply add an AI element. So you could actually add an AI chat inside of Softer, for example. Now this is really on a case-by-case basis, and not all tools have AI inside of them, right? But if you don't have that, there's a second way. And the second way is through automation. So basically, if you want to bring ChatGPT or any other tool that has an access point to it, an API or basically an endpoint, then we can actually trigger that, right? So the second way that you can implement AI inside of one of your software builds is through automation. So for example, if I have a spreadsheet like Google Sheets, then we could have a trigger, and it could either be through Zapier or it could be through Make, that basically says, hey, let's go and let's go ahead and talk to ChatGPT, or maybe we want to talk to Perplexity or one of these other AI providers and ask it a question, and then bring that information back into our app. So for example, we could say, hey, could you check out this field and give me a summary? So let's say, for example, you have the transcript of a sales call. Well, you would be able to, for example, tap into ChatGPT and ask it, hey, could you create a summary of this and tell me the action points that have to be done next? And in fact, you could then even send that through another automation inside your CRM so that your salesperson could have access to that. Now, these are usually one-way connections, but the third way is through API. Now, an API is pretty much a two-way connection, meaning that, for example, if you connect to an API with the weather and the weather people change the weather on that API, then it would automatically update in real time inside of your app. So that's basically a two-way connection that you can do with these different AI tools to bring in AI to your specific product. And for those of you who know me, you know I like no-code tools, and here are the 3 ways that we can incorporate AI inside any build, even if it's built with these beautiful drag and drop builders. So in general, with AI, less is more. Make sure to focus on your goals, and then you're gonna find the tools that are best suited for that goal. And your worst nightmare here is shiny object syndrome. And instead of depending on AI for everything, let's also talk about how to find a co-founder. Okay, so let's talk about how to find a co-founder. Co-founders are by no means a must in today's world. There is a whole new generation of solopreneurs. That being said, having a co-founder can make a huge difference. Accountability, being able to split tasks and conquer those tasks together can help you navigate complicated decisions that you have to make along the startup journey. And it can also just give you a bunch of great motivation. But remember, having the wrong co-founder can also mean a huge catastrophe for your startup journey. And based on CB Insights, it's the number 3 reason why startups actually fail. So my usual advice is that if you have a co-founder, that's amazing. If you don't have a co-founder and you want a co-founder, you can take steps towards finding one, but don't rush into any relationship with a co-founder. These are 5 to 7 year relationships, and you wouldn't run into a personal relationship of that magnitude so easily. So make sure you just have that same kind of vision when it comes to finding a co-founder for your startup. Okay, now before we talk about how to find a co-founder, let's talk about what we need in an actual co-founder. Well, we need a couple of things. First of all, we need to make sure that that person has skills that complement ours, right? So for example, if you are non-technical, you might want someone who's a little bit more or going to take responsibility for the technical side. That's usually the case. If you are very technical, you might need someone who's on the growth, business development, sales side of things. So finding someone who complements your skill sets can be super valuable. It's not a must, again, because I believe anyone can learn anything, but think about what the startup actually needs to be able to grow and thrive. The next thing you need, which is probably the most important thing, is that person believes in your mission, your vision. They also have a long-term perspective on building a startup. They're not just trying to get quick wins and be out. They need to be someone who's committed to this actual mission and vision and are willing to invest time over the next couple of years in building out the startup. And the third thing I find very important is really just a good fit on a personal level, right? If this person is constantly dragging you down, or if you really never agree on anything, well, that's probably a red flag that you might not want to be a partner with this person. Those are a couple tips. Where can we find these people now? Let's talk about the first way. So a big mistake I see people making is going to all the wrong places to meet tech co-founders. Now the first and easiest place to go is your network, right? It's way better to have a friend of a friend or to have a warm introduction to the person who could be your co-founder versus meeting them out of the blue and there's absolutely no context behind that. So I would really start off with your network. Send messages to people who you know who might know people. Now the second place that you can go and start building relationships is in startup events. So here a big mistake people make is that they might go to like a classic sort of networking event to meet a technical co-founder. There actually aren't that many technical co-founders to going to these. So if you're looking for a technical co-founder, instead of going to like a networking event, for example, I might go to something more like a hackathon, where you have lots of technical people who are going there because what are they interested in? Building stuff, cool stuff with other people around. If you're looking for someone who's a little bit more on the salesy side, you might go more to like a pitch competition where you can find people who are talking about their startups and even choose to join their team. Another place you can go is online communities, either free or paid. This is a place where people who are excited about building startups are already hanging out. So go to these places because you're gonna be able to find them there. It could be things like Indie Hacker, which is a great place to find people. It could be a place like Y Combinator's Startup School. It could be a place like We Are No Code. We have our own community too. You can join it for free. There's even a platform called Co-Founder Labs, so you can check that out as well. And then the last place is incubators. So these are startup accelerators, incubators, a place where entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs go to meet other people and to work on their startup ideas. So really the goal here is to like just start up conversations, continue conversations with people you already know who are in your network, and really take things slowly because Honestly, actions are gonna speak louder than words here. You really want to start just dating, right? You want to start by working a little bit, talking through the problem, the vision, the mission, what we're working on here. Not just come to the table and be desperate to have someone build it out or desperate to get someone to sell what you've already built. And again, the worst thing that you can do is jump in a long-term relationship right off the bat. A startup journey from founding to selling the company, if you're taking that route, usually is between 7 and 10 years. So building a relationship where there is actual trust is so important. Another very important thing with finding a co-founder is to literally be very, very clear and to communicate well with that person. You need to agree on things like whose responsibilities are what. What is that specific time commitment that we can provide to this startup right now in the short term and then over the long term? Make sure this person's committed long term, right? Obviously, if this thing is not working out, they won't be able to commit completely long term. But early on, just kind of agreeing on the basics, like, okay, what responsibilities, what are you gonna be doing? What am I gonna be doing? How much time are we gonna dedicate towards this? These are all questions that are so important, and communication has to be very clear from the beginning. Now, the other thing that has to be clear as well when you get into one of these relationships is how the partnership actually works. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the section where we talk about equity and how equity actually works. But you want to be very clear about the mechanisms of how people own their shares. And how do you give out shares? Well, what we're trying to do here is really to be clear from the beginning so everyone understands the rules of the game, and then there aren't problems later on where certain things arise and then we have to fix them, and it creates all sorts of conflict between the two different founders. So if you ask me the quickest way, I would go to in-person events. I would also meet more people online. I would start actually conversations and meeting up with that person to work on things. And then if the partnership was great, then awesome, we can start committing to a longer term relationship. In this section, we're gonna talk about how to build a pitch deck. Now, this is basically the modern version of a business plan. No one's interested in reading your 30 to 40 page business plan at this point when you just have an idea, maybe a product, maybe even just a first paying customer. The ability to communicate the message of the opportunity behind your startup is super important early stage. And the pitch deck is the tool you're gonna use to communicate that for you. A very disheartening fact is that the average investor will spend less than 1 minute on a pitch deck. Why? Because they have a stack of startups who are looking to raise money from them. So your ability to communicate your message very authentically and very clearly is super, super important, and that's the goal of the pitch deck. Now, the first thing to know is there are two types of pitch deck. One of them is a presentation deck, right? Basically, when you walk into the room and you're gonna talk to an investor, it's the deck that you're gonna be able to use to support your arguments and flow of information as you're actually pitching in person. The other deck is actually called the sendable deck. Now, this is a deck that has a lot of the same elements, but unfortunately you're not gonna be in the room when this is being passed around. So you need to communicate the full message throughout that pitch deck. And yeah, you're gonna have to have both of these pitch decks because sometimes you're not gonna get a meeting until you send through a deck. And that deck needs to tell the story as well as you do in person. Now, all decks usually follow a similar structure that was created by people like Guy Kawasaki. He had the 10 slides to have an awesome pitch deck. And basically these slides are as follows. First, you wanna kind of communicate the problem. Then you wanna communicate the solution. Sometimes that's presenting the product. Sometimes we have an additional slide that presents the product itself. Then we want people to understand the business model, how this thing can generate revenue. Then we're gonna show how that plays over time. So basically the market size of that opportunity. Now, market size is great, but once we know that, we need to figure out, okay, great, well, what's the go-to-market strategy, the marketing strategy early stage to acquire those customers? Then who is the team who's gonna actually be executing on this strategy? Who are the competitors in this field? And where do you position within those competitors? Show me a slide about financials, and then probably the ask, right? Which is you asking for money, and you want that to be structured in a very specific way. Now, that's the basic structure, but there are so many places where people look like amateurs because they make some of the biggest mistakes in the book. So one of the big first things I would say is if you avoid the following mistakes I'm about to show you, you will already be way ahead of the curve when it comes to presenting your startup idea. When I was the director of an accelerator program, I would go on stage and I would talk on a panel. And then afterwards, I would have a whole lineup of founders, probably about 30 people, who would want to talk to me afterwards and talk to me about their ideas specifically and see whether or not they could get into the accelerator or if, whatever, I could provide any additional help. Now, I would usually walk away from these having heard about 20 to 30 different pitches, and I would usually have absolutely no idea what any one of these founders did. And that's probably the biggest lesson I want to teach you today. Your goal when you're talking to someone is really just one thing at first, is to get the person to understand what you actually do. And usually the way that people pitch their startups is full of lingo, they blabber for a bunch, and they actually didn't get the person to understand what they do in a basic way, because they expect that person to know everything. And usually when you're an investor, you might have a lot of know-how, but you also don't know every single industry. So an important thing here is to very much simplify the message. So you could say, my business does this, and then have a second example basically, where it's like, in other words, we do this for that, right? So the people are gonna be like, oh, okay, I got it. That's literally the only thing you have to do, and everyone gets it wrong. People often talk about pitching your product like you would do it to your 6-year-old nephew or to your grandmother. That is actually not bad advice, because guess what? People who understand that industry will ask you very targeted questions, but people who don't understand that will also be able to talk and be like, oh, I know someone who's like in this industry, potentially you could talk to them. The more people you get to understand what you do, the more likely you are to be able to get all the people and resources to build this thing into something big. And now let's talk about the biggest mistakes people make in their pitch decks that I see all the time and make them look like total amateurs. Let's go. Okay, so I pretty much have one per slide here, but I'm not gonna cover them all. We're gonna first talk about the market size, right? Because people think that investors want you to say that you have this enormous market that's growing and you're gonna get 1% of this market, right? And you're gonna become a billionaire because this is a $100 billion industry. And you're gonna just take 1% of that industry and you're gonna be rich. Guess what? People will not believe that, and it sounds inexperienced. So if you are already saying that you're gonna just get a tiny fraction of this enormous market, you're taking the wrong approach to the market slide. The market size slide really has to be around showing on a small scale that your business model works, and then showing how that works at a larger scale. So it's much more interesting for you to tell an investor, I have 5 first customers, they each pay, let's say, a $10 a month subscription. So we're currently at a $50 a month MRR, tiny numbers, but then you could say there are actually about 100,000 of these individuals that I could target just in my little geographic area. I'm planning on just getting a small percentage of this, so maybe we'll get 10% of this. So let's say 1,000 customers at $10 a month. So over the next 3 months, we're gonna hit $10,000 per month. This is recurring revenue, MRR. But in the US alone, there's a potential for this to reach, and then, much larger number if we get there. In the next 3 years, we expect to be at 10 million MRR, for example, right? So this really shows that, hey, I'm already doing this on a small scale, and in my short vicinity, there's actually a bunch of more people that I could target, and I'm gonna be targeting over the next 3 months. But then after this, I need your money to be able to bring it to 10 million, right? That's gonna accelerate the process. This really shows that you're doing it, you're realistic about the expectations that you can hit in a short term, and then explaining to them, hey, we need your money because of this. So don't just be a 1% of the market guy. No, we wanna be a, hey, we're already doing this. These are the number of clients. This is how much money we can make from these clients. And this is how we expect to do that over X number of years. It's just a much better approach. So this is a big mistake. Another mistake people make often is in the ask slide. So the ask slide is a slide where you say, I need $10 million for 10% of my company, XYZ. In this slide, oftentimes, people just say, I need a bunch of money and we're looking for investors, right? Now, that is not a good approach for a number of reasons, but the more important thing is that here what we needed to do is we need to tie this ask to a very specific milestone. So if you're saying, okay, I'm looking for $10 million and that's gonna get us over the next 18 months, so usually you're talking about 18 months of operations, to X. So this is milestone, actual milestone. We'll grow the revenue to this, we'll this, that, we're gonna launch the second product. So actually giving them the milestones of what you're gonna execute with that money. And then you wanna talk about use of funds. So it's like those $10 million, we're gonna use this amount for this, we're gonna use that amount for that, and we're gonna use this amount for that. This is really gonna give them a lot more confidence that you know where you're including your money. And this is actually a much better approach for investors. They want specific outcomes for that money. They know that if you go from here to here, then they'll be able to reinvest or they'll be able to help you raise more money with other partners that they know as well. And so their goal is to get you from here to here. So promise this. Don't keep your promise vague. You want to actually have specific milestones that you're going to hit with the money that you're doing. And then you want to show them how you're using that. Now, the team slide, let's talk about that. Usually the team slide looks something like this. This. Here are the 3 people, and people have awesome names like CEO, COO, and CFO. And the truth is that early on, everyone knows that who cares about the names? What's more important is, do these people actually cover the important things that have to be done in the business to be able to bring this to the next level? So you don't need to have everyone for it to become a $10 to $100 million business, but you do need to have someone who's in charge of sales and marketing, for example. Another person who's gonna be in charge of building out the product potentially. And so you really wanna cover everything that you would need to be able to execute on the plan that you've just described to them throughout the pitch deck. Now, the other thing that people often do is that under here, they have 1,000 advisors. Here are the 10 amazing advisors. And it's like, no one cares about these very loosely tied to you advisors. This doesn't bring more credibility because they know that in the end of the day, it's gonna be the 3 of you who are tied to this thing. And then for each person, you probably wanna say the role that they're gonna be fulfilling, but you also wanna put 1 or 2 or 3 impressive facts, right? So fancy university, impressive fact, great. 1, 2 hackathons, impressive fact. These can be very different facts. It can be like, worked for Procter & Gamble for 10 years. And here you could even have a section which is like trusted by, and then you have a couple of logos, XYZ, and it's like the logos of the big companies that you've already worked for. The most important thing here in this slide, for the team slide, because these are the people who are actually gonna execute on this dream. This is what they're buying into the most. We need to prove to them that we have the skills internally to execute on the plan, and we're also the right team to bet on. Now, the next slide we're gonna talk about is actually the traction slide. Traction is basically revenue. It can be a number of other things, but usually we're talking about revenue here. And here I usually recommend that for traction, if we don't have revenue, we want to find other impressive facts, right? So if you're very early stage, it might be about your team and how much experience those individuals have. It might be letters of intent of future customers who have signed something saying, hey, we're willing to buy this thing once it's ready. Some things that people underestimate, which doesn't have to do with revenue, is customer satisfaction. So it's like, if you get a review, like, that is pretty solid, right? A review of someone saying this is the most amazing tool ever. Another thing that's impressive are reorders, right? So it's like if 30% of people who ordered a first time order again, that's really good news, right? It means, oh man, we're in the reorder business. We're not in the marketing business, right? So these kind of things are indicators that there is stickiness around your product, that people like your product, and that ultimately to the investor tells them, hey, there's potential here, and this is something that could actually, make money. So make sure to, if you don't have traction, to bet on some of the other big things that you have going for you in your startup. And if you do have traction, don't just talk about the revenue. Talk about other impressive metrics like reorder rate. Do you have any customer testimonials? Do you have any stories that you can share with them that are super impressive? Have you won any awards? Do you have any, anything pretty much that can highlight why they would invest in you. Now let's talk a little bit about those 2 versions that we talked about. The sendable deck and the deck that you're gonna be pitching with in person, right? So there's basically the presentation deck. This one is going to be large numbers and images. Think of it that way. As simple as you can do. You're gonna be able to quite easily convey your idea because you're actually in the room. And with the sendable deck, you're gonna wanna have a slightly different format, right? You wanna have each slide that basically tells a story. So the title might be the one line that you want them to retain, right? You're telling the major story and if they just read the headlines of your slide, they can understand the whole thing. Underneath, there is supporting evidence. So if I say the current fishing lure industry is in a crisis, and then it's like small problem with a fact, and it's about time that we disrupt it, for example. And then it's like the solution slide, and it's like an all-in-one platform to this, that, the other. And then it's like, it solves this, this, and this, the 3 problems that we had here on the solution slide. And so here you're gonna actually want to bring people through a reading experience where they can actually go through that storytelling that you would be telling in person. Whereas a presentation slide, you literally might just have one actual number here and one image because you're gonna be telling the story on top of the slide. And that brings us to another format. I do like the idea of creating just a short video. So basically you can use a tool like Loom, loom.com, or another video screen recording tool, and basically just record yourself speaking over your slides, and you can send that to people who are interested in it. Now, remember that the pitch deck is usually just to get first conversations going. You don't have to communicate everything. And if you're trying to communicate everything here, it's a real big mistake. So think of it more like an actual teaser to your startup and this opportunity, and then use that to actually gather some interest in knowing more from the investor, so they reach out to you to get a second meeting and to be able to potentially chat about the opportunity. Now, the biggest thing to keep in mind with your pitch decks in general, same thing with a business plan, is that it's only gonna be as good as you've actually built the business, right? So I would highly recommend that you first build a business, get a little bit of traction around it, because then it's gonna be much easier to create an impressive pitch deck to go out there and get funding. Investors no longer invest in your ideas. So you have to come with a couple months of traction or revenue to be able to prove that you have a case to get money to build and grow your startup. And that's very important, because actually every moment spent planning, preparing the pitch decks, reaching out to investors is a moment that you're not spending building out and growing your startup. Now, when we're building a deck, remember that you want to create a first version, and you want to make that as easy as possible to adapt, so adapt it yourself. And then once you've created the proper content, you can then start thinking of designs, because you're going to have to adapt that deck a lot of times before it's perfect. So make sure not to create perfect designs early that you're going to have to change later on. Okay, in this section, we're going to talk about how to get investors. Now, I've raised money for 2 startups that I've run out of 4. And I've also helped more than 600 founders raise over $56 million in funding. So in this section, I'm gonna be talking about some of the fundamentals of fundraising, and then I'm gonna tell you the step-by-step process that you can use to fundraise for your startup. Now, a couple things you should know before we jump in. First of all, there are 3 paths that founders can take. The first one is to bootstrap, not take any money, and own 100% of the company. Completely viable and a very popular model today. The second one would be to get into an investing accelerator program like Techstars or Y Combinator. Here we're raising about $150,000 for about 7% of the company, and you're basically helped to raise additional funding throughout the program. And then finally, you can go to investors directly and raise money. But there are lots of different types of investors, and there's also different strategies that you can use to get them. Now, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, when is the right time to actually fundraise? You see, over the past 15 years, there's been a big shift. Before, you could literally just show up with a great idea and a small team, and they would just invest money in your startup. Today, we're really talking about 90% of all deals going towards revenue generating startups. There's actually a study that was done that showed between 2010, it was only 9% of deals going towards revenue generating startups. And by 2019, that number was already 67%. And today, again, about 85% of all deals go to revenue generating startups. And in fact, a famous quote from Mark Suster, who is a big investor in Los Angeles, is that they invest in lines, not dots. The first time they meet you is just one point in time, and you're showing a specific amount of traction or revenue. And they actually want to meet you a couple every month or 2 and see that the direction is going up and to the right. In addition to that, raising money is not in and of itself a huge success. 67% of startups that raise money from venture capital firms, these large investors in Silicon Valley basically, actually end up stagnating or dying. So it's not because you raise money from an investor that you have a successful business. Okay, now an important part is to understand the different profiles of investors, because these act differently and it's important for you to understand. There are 4 main sections. The first one is going to be called a FFF. So these are friends and family. The last F is actually for fools, so people who don't have experience. Now, again, these people are usually gonna be the first people that you get a check from. And fools are pretty much people who get excited about tech but don't really know the tech investing game, all right? The second category is going to be the accelerator program. So this is a program that's going to ask for about 7% of your company for an investment of roughly $100,000 to $150,000. And they're really gonna help you raise that next round by teaching you how to actually pitch, raise money, and provide you with those connections. So those are like Y Combinator, Techstars, 500 Startups. And so these can be very beneficial if you're looking to fundraise, especially if you have no experience or contacts. Now, the third group are angel investors. These are individuals investing their own money, anywhere between $10,000 and $100,000. Those are usually called super angels. But basically they're investing their own money into startups, and they'll make a number of investments every single year. And then finally, we have venture capital investors. These investors are very professionalized. They're called institutional investors. And what they do is that they raise money from even richer people, and then they basically invest in startups at scale, right? Now, the reason why it's important to understand these is because each one of them acts kind of differently and pretty much is willing to invest at a different phase as well. And if you're trying to raise a first round of investment, I would only really focus on friends and family, accelerator programs, and also angels, right? Because venture capital firms often say that they invest in ideas or early stage startups, but they really don't. So I wouldn't waste my time on that. Now, every investor is trying to do one thing. They're trying to make money, right? So everything that you're talking to them about should be kind of angled around how this is going to make money. So, you have happy customers, that's great because it points towards people wanting to buy your product, meaning that there's potential to make money, right? Building your team. Look, we have all the right people because they believe that those people will be able to execute and make money. So everything kind of leads back to money, and they're looking to really make a return on investment for the investment they're putting in your company. That's basically a value multiplier that they're looking for. Now, all investors are looking at a bunch of deals, and they basically are trying to do one key thing: to mitigate risk. So they are trying to find any excuse not to invest in your startup. And if they have absolutely no excuse by the end of the whole process, they'll probably invest in your startup. But the funny thing is that if you approach them and you're basically asking for money, they're more likely to give you advice. And if you come asking for advice and developing the relationship, then they might be offering you money. And it's kind of funny because you're always in the best position to fundraise when you actually don't need the money. It's just a great catalyst for you to actually build and grow your business quickly. So the question of when is a good time to raise money is pretty much when you have revenue, you are growing, and you can use it as a catalyst, not really for the very early stages. Now, every fundraising strategy is a funnel. Let me show you. Cool, so here's the funnel that I just drew. I'm not an artist, but hey, that's what you got for today. So here at the top, what we're gonna have are pretty much anyone who has heard of your startup, right? These are all the individuals. Let's say that you're pitching at pitch events. Let's say that you're sending a pitch deck to different investors, anyone who's ever heard of your startup. Then at the top of your funnel here, you might have a first row who are actually potential investors, right? So these are potential investors in your startup. So some people who you've contacted, some people who you've been put in contact with. Then there's a couple of these people who you've been able to have a meeting with. Let's just call it meet. Then there's only a couple of those people who actually gave you a second meeting. And then here there's people who are going and asking for a term sheet. This is where you talk about all the terms of investment. And then at the very bottom of this, you're basically gonna have one or two investors who are investing in your startup at the very end, cutting the check, right? Because even here, we're talking about like contracts, and here you can lose a lot of people along the way as well. So basically, one important thing to understand is that it is a numbers game. So don't get frustrated. You're going to definitely get no's. In fact, Airbnb got hundreds of no's at the very beginning of them raising money for their startup. So make sure that you have a wide enough funnel and that you're playing the funnel game, right? Because if you have 1,000 people who hear what you do, who have heard about your startup, then you might get about, let's say 100, let's say 10%, 100 investors who you've reached out to, only about, let's say 20 of them who you've been able to meet with, only 5 of those asked for a next meeting, only 3 of those went on to ask for a term sheet, and 1 fell out during the contract phase. And so now you have 2 investors, right? Each one invests, let's say $100,000, and you have a 200K round right here. Boom. So that's the way that you should be thinking about it. And the reason for that is that you're gonna be able to manage your own expectations. These people get thousands of deals every single month. And so don't worry, it's not personal. It's just them doing their business the way that they wanna do their business. Now, knowing that we're running a funnel, one thing that's super important is that at the top here, the way that we talk about our startup is very simple, because the simpler it is for someone to understand our startup idea and what we're trying to accomplish, the easier it's gonna be to meet more people who are actually qualified buyers who kind of come down this funnel here. Now, the reason we wanna do that is because a lot of the people here at the top, basically, they are not your ideal investors, right? So we need to maximize the chances that some of these people can introduce us to investors by making them understand what we do, right? Now, Here, people just need to understand the basics about what your business does, and then if they know someone, they might be able to connect you. This is what we call lily pad hopping, actually, which is where one person introduces you to another person, and suddenly you hit the right investor. Because you're usually only 1 or 2 connections away from all the investors you want to actually reach. So the wider the top of the funnel, which is done by having very simple messaging about your startup, allows you to have more that come in here, and if you multiply this by 10, you have 20 investors at the bottom here, right? And that's the goal, it's a numbers game. Okay, so what are the actual steps that you have to go through to be able to fundraise, right? Well, there are pretty much 5 steps. I'm gonna break them down right now. The first one is planning, right? Preparation. The second one is outreach. Then it's gonna be running all these meetings. The fourth is pretty much creating demand. And then the last one is to close. So now let's break down each one of those. Okay, so the first step is preparation. First, you wanna prepare your pitch deck. You wanna prepare your financial forecast. But then what you wanna do is you want to start preparing for the fundraising process. So you're first going to research specific investors. You're gonna wanna target investors who have money in their funds, for example, or they are actually actively investing. You want to research that they invest in startups like yours. You wanna basically create a hit list of investors who have the potential to invest in your startup. Preparation also means knowing the terminology, understanding startup talk, so that when you jump in this meeting, you don't look like super silly. The second thing is to prepare yourself by understanding some of the general terms that are used, like metrics inside of startups. For example, if you don't know what retention means, or if you don't know what CAC means, or if you don't know what MOM growth means, then you might want to research that, right? You want to prepare yourself so that you don't look like an amateur in front of investors, right? Especially if we're talking about institutional investors or people who have experience investing in startups. But once you have the material and you are prepared and you also have a list of target investors, we're going to want to start doing outreach, right? And the best way to do outreach, which is step 2, is through warm introductions. So of course you want to participate in pitch events so you can get yourself out there to meet people who could potentially create these warm introductions. But there are also other types of introductions that are really valuable, right? So another good introduction is, for example, an investor who's investing in your startup, they've already confirmed, they can introduce you to other investors, which is great. What if you don't have that? Well, the second best introduction is actually from an entrepreneur who has gotten investment from that investor. So if you develop good relationships with other founders who have raised from these companies that you're looking to get money from, then that introduction is going to be very good, right? Because you know that they invested in that founder. That means there's a bond of trust between the investor and the founder himself. And then there are other levels, like professors that you might have had if you've gone to nice universities, or the lawyers who are essentially gonna get paid to close the deal if it goes through. But warm introductions generally are just the best way to go. And yeah, if you don't have any connections, then you have to start somewhere. So start going to events, start participating in pitch events, start getting yourself out there, and you're gonna see that they start developing themselves. Some investors also pride themselves by actually, opening up people's emails who cold DM them. So make sure to have creative strategies as well, like that, where you can go on Twitter and just basically send a quick message to someone. Here, I would have a very simple message in one line. So it's basically explain what you do and the exciting sort of traction that you have to date. That'll probably attract an investor to at least answer. But again, the best is warm introductions. Now, success. You've gotten your first meeting booked. Number 3 is to actually go to the meeting, right? So here you want to do a couple of things. First of all, you're probably gonna have time to do somewhere between a 3 and 15-minute pitch. You're probably going to want to spend only 20% of that time pitching with the help of your presentation deck, and of course, because you're in the room. But then also leave plenty of time, about 80% of the time, to answer all the questions, right? Because ultimately, you want to get the chance to answer the questions that they have, because that's where you're going to show a lot of your deeper knowledge and build that trust with them. Now, one thing during the meeting that people get wrong is that they expect people to pretty much write you a check then and there. They won't, right? So the only goal of this first meeting is to get another meeting. So that's all you need to go. You need to get the second meeting. That's all that you're looking for in that first meeting. And every time you're in a meeting, you want to find out what the next step is going to be, right? So not for the first meeting, but as soon as you jump into the second meeting, you want to start commanding the conversation so that you go towards a close. Now, for that close to happen, you have to have some other interests, right? So this is all around creating demand. In the fundraising strategy, you want to create demand, right? And the best demand is when there are multiple people who want what you have to sell, and you're kind of putting them in competition with each other so that they want to very quickly be the first to invest, right? So this is where you really want to book as many meetings and go as hard as you can in the fundraising process as quickly as possible, because fundraising honestly will take away from you building your business, and you're gonna wanna get in there and out there so you can continue building your business, right? Every moment that you're not spending or that you're spending fundraising, you're not spending building your actual business. And that's what matters most to all these investors as well, right? So create demand, get more than one investor interested, get those investors to introduce you to other investors and bring them on board, and take as many meetings as quickly as possible, because that's gonna bring us to step 5, which is the close. Now, the close is basically going to be going from, starting off with a basic term sheet, which just outlines the general terms of the contracts. Once you agree on that, we talk about contracts, and then basically money in bank. And one piece of advice here is that until the money hits the bank, remember that you don't have an investor, even if you have a signed contract. So make sure to follow these different steps and to create some pressure towards the close by having a lot of competition in the process. And to be able to do that, you need to be well prepared. You need to be put in contact with plenty of great people. Then you have to run those meetings. You have to learn about that. And if you want more information, because obviously I can't present everything here, I would highly recommend a book called Venture Deals, where they really go into some of the minutia or the smaller print of how this entire process is run, and to teach you some of the terms that you're gonna need to know walking in. So quick recap, make sure that you are actually ready for investors, because if not, you're gonna spend a lot of time fundraising if you don't have revenue. Number 2, focus on getting in and out of there as quickly as possible so you can continue building your business. 3, come prepared because you're gonna need it. 4, build relationships early, expecting the fruits of those relationships to pay off later, meaning that you can build early relationships asking for advice with these investors. And then when you're actually ready to fundraise, they might be a great person to turn to ask for money. And number 5, create that sense of urgency, because if investors aren't feeling urgency or fear of missing out, FOMO, then they will happily sit in the backseat and just wait month after month for you to either go to success or fail. And that's pretty much it for the fundraising section. Okay, now let's talk about how equity works. Equity are the shares inside of a company. And they can be a very, very powerful tool to get people all on board to your ultimate mission, which is to have a thriving company, right? And to stay long-term in that company, to grow it and make it something amazing. And early on in the startup, you wanna be very mindful about how you distribute those shares. Why? Well, because investors who are gonna come in and buy shares from you later on wanna make sure that, hey, you actually value what you have here. Now, when we talk about equity, we really are talking about 2 different things. The first one is ownership, right? The second thing is decision-making. So there are different types of shares. There are sort of common stock, which is just normal shares. And then there are preferred shares. Oftentimes institutional investors want preferred shares. Those come along with like more voting rights, decision-making power, this kind of stuff. But anyway, the main people that you're gonna be giving equity to in the company are employees, it's going to be advisors, it's going to be investors, and it can be other people along the way as well, but there I would really be careful with who I'm giving shares to. Now, the first thing people ask me all the time is how many shares should I give to my co-founder, for example? And the answer is usually pretty straightforward and always follows similar principles, right? The earlier you start and the earlier you are involved in a startup, the more shares you will get, right? For example, if you join Airbnb right now, they're gonna give you tiny stock options, right? Whereas if you joined at the very beginning and you were one of the co-founders with Brian Chesky, well, you would probably have a large portion of the company, right? So if you have a co-founder, for example, and you started this thing together, then pretty much makes sense to have a 50-50 split, and it also makes both people feel valued. You'll see in the explanation I'm about to give you now that there are a couple mechanisms that happen when you distribute equity, which will influence your equity stakes as well. Now, if a co-founder joins later, it can be anywhere from 5 to 50%, that number that you would give to them. And there are also some mechanisms that we're gonna use and discuss in a second that allow you to protect the company from both yourself and your co-founder and, each other. For future employees, this is a really good way to get them on board with the long-term vision, right? you pay them a smaller amount of sort of upfront sort of salary, and you give them some shares in the company because they actually believe that this will grow into becoming a really big affair, and you can actually make a lot of money by simply having shares in a startup and have the value explode. So for employees who join a little bit later, we're talking about anywhere from 1% to 5%, depending on the role and the seniority level, and also the stage at which you are in terms of the process of building the startup. Now for investors, it's something a little bit different. Investors usually take anywhere from 10 to maybe 30% of the company in each big funding event or funding round. And I'll explain how that influences the shares of the existing members as we sort of go along. Okay, let's hit the board so I can show you how this works. Okay, so for me to explain to you the dynamics of equity throughout a early stage startup, I wanna just give you kind of an example. Say that, for example, you and your buddy, you start a company. The company, you just split it 50-50. So for the moment, it doesn't really have a value. You have 50% of this company. And let's say that the number of shares that have been issued, this is really just something that's a bit more technical, is basically, let's say there's 10 million shares, right? So basically, if you have 50%, then you own 5 million shares in the company, right? Now, when you go out and raise money, what happens? Like, is it you selling your 50%? No. What happens is that you basically issue more shares. So let's say that here, I'm gonna actually issue more shares. I'm gonna issue an additional, let's say 5 million shares in the company. That ultimately are gonna be additional shares that both me and the other founder have agreed upon. We're gonna sell to an investor for a specific amount of money. The amount of money is basically determined on valuation. So let's say that we raised $10 million for that amount. So this person's putting in $10 million here. What happens after this funding round is that we have a larger company, right? We have both of those. Now the company is worth, the $10 million that this person invested, plus let's say that it was worth $10 before. So now the value of the company is, $10 million and $10. $10 million, $10. But basically what's happening here is that you will suddenly have a smaller percentage of the company, but the company now, instead of being worth $10, it's worth 10 million. So you might only have at this point 30%, right? Because now, you put, let's say these 10 million shares plus 5 million shares, those are 15 million shares. You have 5 million shares still, 5 million shares, 30%, right? 33%. But basically the point is that by raising money, you're raising at a higher valuation and you're also putting a bunch of money in the company. So now the value of this company is much larger. So even though you get diluted, which is, you went from 50% to 30% here, well, you own 30% of now a $10 million business instead of owning 50% of a $10 business. So that's pretty much what happens in the fundraising process. You basically are raising money and you're raising at a higher valuation, and then you are diluting the percentage of shares that you have in the company, but you have a smaller piece of a much larger company. Now, there are other dynamics that can also take place. Usually you want to open up a pool of shares for investors, meaning that you're going to issue more shares. So let's say, hey, we need more shares because we need to hire a bunch of people. Now we have $10 million in the company. We need to get these people excited, on board for the long run. Great. Let's open up 1 million shares on top of that. And now, we could basically have a slightly bigger pie. And there's a small percentage of this that is for employees that we're going to distribute as we hire more people. And yes, we get diluted a little bit more, so we might have 28% or something like that at this point. But the whole goal is that over time, we are building a larger and larger company, and we own a slightly smaller percentage of a much bigger company. Now, there are a couple concepts that you need to understand with regard to these shares, which I think are really important. You want to protect yourself and, more importantly, the company from everyone else who has shares in the company, specifically your co-founder. So there is a clause that is called vesting. Now, vesting, what it means is that you have 50% in the company. But for example, if you leave within the first 4 years, you have to give up a number of your shares, right? So let's say that we divide that equally over the 4 years, right? Meaning that if you leave within 1 year, you have to give 75% of your shares back. If you leave after 2 years, you have to give back 50, 3 years, 75%, 25% back, and et cetera, et cetera. This basically means that you earn the shares over time. And the reason for that is that you want people to be committed for a longer period of time inside your startup. So this is really, investors will require it for you to have vesting schedules, but it's also a great way for you to set it up so that if you, for any reason, want to leave the company at some point, you can simply just be like, you know what, I need to step away for XYZ reasons. I'm willing to give up my shares. It's very clear with your co-founder, and they can then use those shares to go and hire someone else to replace you or things like that. So it's really a healthy mechanism to keep people in longer term, but also to have a very clear agreement with your co-founder of like, hey, if either of us leaves, you know, we have to like provide a little bit of our shares back. And so that's basically it. There's another mechanism that's called a cliff. So a cliff can be for testing new people, basically. Let's say that for the first year, you actually, if you leave within the first year, you actually have to give all your shares away. So it's basically what it sounds like, right? It's like a period early on where, yes, you're earning those shares, but you're only paid those shares if you stay X amount of time. If not, you get nothing. And this vesting is basically just saying like, yeah, like we're gonna split that into, and it's basically pro rata, which means day by day. Yeah, so if you were to work all the way to here, and then you left right here, you would lose everything because we're saying right here that we have a cliff for this, for the first year. It could be a 3-month cliff as well. If you were to leave after, like let's say you leave like here, well then you still have 25% that you could keep of the shares in the company. So this is a simplified version. I hope that it was clear though. And these are the kind of things that you just kind of need to know. And it really makes a good relationship with your partner too, to have clear rules in case anyone leaves. And honestly, I've been in vesting schedules where the other person left and we were fine, right? Because then they're like, okay, I'm gonna have to give up some of my shares, perfect. And everything's very clear. And so, you know, you don't have to break up friendships because you and your co-founder who are buddies separate. Now, one important thing to know is that you will need to include your team in understanding some of these basic mechanisms so they don't feel like they're ripped off. If one day they're like, what, I thought I had 20% of the company and now I have 15, you just want to explain these mechanisms. So those were some of the core principles you need to understand when it comes to how equity works in an early stage startup. And now, my friends, we're going to jump into how to sell a business. Okay, so now let's talk about how to sell a business. I've built out several businesses and I've sold one. And I can tell you that the process is relatively similar to the process of raising money. The only difference is that you're basically selling not just a portion of the company, but the entire company. And one of the funny things about this process is that oftentimes an acquisition offer comes in without you actually actively going out to look for someone to buy your company. And that's really cool because you can actually, at that point, have a lot more leverage along the conversation, negotiation, and you can choose to just not sell as well. So the best time to sell your business is actually when you don't necessarily need to sell your business. Now, if you currently already have investors in your startups, they are gonna play actually a really big role in getting you to the acquisition. Why? Well, because that's their liquidity event, which means that's the way they get their money back out that they invested in you at the very beginning and throughout the process of you building this company. And yes, this is going to be a game-changing opportunity for you as an entrepreneur. It's going to be to sell your company. But remember that you haven't sold the company until the money hits the bank. It's the same thing with fundraising. Now, one of the things you'll want to do if you're looking to sell your business will be to get your numbers up, right? Because if not, you're not going to get very good terms for selling your business. So you want to make sure that you have revenue growth. You want to make sure that you have good profitability. You want to make sure that you have all of the things and the numbers that show that this is a thriving company, because what? We're going to get better terms for that. Now, the next thing you want to do is kind of set expectation, kind of get a third party potentially to come in and provide a valuation of your company. So you can kind of figure out how you could be able to sell, right? Like what price point could you sell at the moment, so that you kind of know what to expect, you know what a good deal is, you know what a bad deal is. And usually this is gonna be done through a free cash flow method of valuation. So just ask a financial specialist who's gonna be able to create a valuation of your company. Now, this process can sometimes be pretty complicated. So what you wanna do is build a team of advisors who are gonna be able to guide you through it. And of course, if you have investors, those will be the first people to turn towards because they'll have done this process many times before, and it's gonna make it increasingly streamlined. They'll just know who to call in, and they'll know even potentially who to sell your company to. So that can really make the process a little bit smoother. The other thing that's gonna make this process smoother is to have all of your financials in order so that you can easily present those during due diligence. Now, due diligence is pretty much where they do a background check on all of the different things. They check all of the details to make sure that the deal is good to go. And that's only really done once you agree on the basic terms of the deal. Then they go in and dig for all of the smaller details to make sure that everything's in line so that you can actually sell the business. Now, if you're actually actively looking for someone to buy your business, you want to do a lot of research beforehand, right? Figure out what kind of companies buy companies like yours. What is kind of the price point that they're buying? What's the reason why they're buying it, right? A lot of this information can actually be found on Crunchbase, which is quite interesting. Because deals sometimes just fall through, you wanna make sure that you have a backup plan. So make sure that you're actually not neglecting the revenue and the operations of your business throughout the negotiation process. Another thing you might find is that employees might get unmotivated to work hard if they know that a sale is gonna happen. So you might want to be very strategic about the way that you communicate it. You might want to keep only a very small number of people involved in the process of selling your company until it's actually done, and then everyone can reap the rewards, right? Especially people who are key to the operations of the company, because we don't want them to lose motivation, but also we don't want them to not know about the deal at all. So at first you might want to keep a small number of people knowing about the actual transaction that's taking place, because hey, it could fall through. And if it does, you don't want them to be excited and then it falls through. So there's kind of a balance that has to take place there in terms of the communication to your larger team. Now, a couple tips here. A, make sure that you have multiple parties interested in buying your company. And two would be to basically angle the sale of your company strategically to what they want, right? So the company who's buying your company are really looking for something in your company, right? Your company is really going to give them something they don't currently have. So make sure that when you actually talk about your company, you're positioning it as a solution to what they're trying to do. So for example, if you're an AI consulting company and you're selling to a larger consulting company, they want that know-how, they want those clients, they want the employees. So make sure that you angle things in the direction of being the solution to their problem, so that you have higher likelihood of having interest from them. The third piece of advice is just hire an M&A lawyer if you need to. Mergers and acquisition, basically someone who's used to selling companies day in, day out. And then yes, if you have investors, rely on them too. And that was how to sell your company as well. Now we've covered pretty much every step, but I do want to share some of the key mistakes that I think that a lot of founders make and how you can actually avoid them, because I think that just avoiding those can save you a lot of time and money along the way. So let's jump into them. Okay, so in this bonus section, I want to talk about some of the largest mistakes that I've seen so many people go down and how you can avoid them in your startup. You see, when I ran a startup accelerator program, I literally saw thousands of startups, and so many of the mistakes were the same. So if you can simply avoid those mistakes, you can learn from other people's, and you don't have to commit those, and you don't have to waste time and money. So let's talk about the key ones that I found. The first one is don't hire expensive programmers and designers to test the market and to get first demand, to get an understanding, and even usually to build your first product. There are tools out there that allow you to do that yourself and to have more control. Why? Because the number one reason startups fail is because they don't find product market fit. And that journey sometimes can take a while. So the more that you invest in learning the skills to actually experiment with different sort of target markets and business models and products, the more likely you are to be able to nail it and at some point then be able to grow the business, right? So having control early on is really important. And as soon as the bank hits zero is pretty much when you have to close. So for that not to happen, make sure that you aren't spending a bunch of money left and right. The second thing is procrastination. So basically that can take form of shiny object syndrome, where you're constantly distracted, like interested in all these cool new things coming out, but you're not actually taking actions. Another way that could show itself is basically through perfectionism. So you're like working on something and you want it to be so perfect, and it takes ages for you to launch that first product. And then you end up going to market, realizing, oh, we have to change it anyway. And so all that perfection was really for nothing. So time early on in a startup is one of the most important resources that you have. And the quicker you're able to quickly figure out what the market actually wants and kind of pivot towards that, the quicker that you're gonna be able to find product market fit, generate revenue, and then be able to grow from there. Another thing is analysis paralysis. So basically just overthinking things, thinking that you can think your way through problems. No, you gotta take action. Action over perfection, as we talked about earlier. And through those actions, you're going to understand what's required, and then you're gonna be able to adapt to that. Now, the third piece of advice is that if you are going to fundraise, trust me, it takes a huge amount of time and effort, constantly changing pitch decks, financial forecasts, and you definitely don't want to do that too early, right? Because every moment is a moment you're taking out from actually building your business. Plus, no investor cares until you actually have revenue. So make sure that you only go after raising money, if ever, when you have revenue and revenue over at least 3 to 6 months with a proven model, and you're really just looking for that money to grow. Now, the next piece of advice is to not get distracted by the competition. You can build businesses, million-dollar businesses with lots of direct competitors. So don't think that because there's a company that's doing something similar to what you do, that there isn't an opportunity for you to do it yourself and have a million-dollar business. Don't always think that you have to build a billion-dollar business to be happy. Oftentimes, this is what we hear in the news, and it is a load of BS if you ask me. We want to really build businesses so that we have freedom, so that we create this financial freedom, and also so that we can do things that we actually care about and build things that are meaningful. So don't always get caught up into the main narrative of like, hey, I gotta raise a bunch of money and then I gotta build a billion-dollar company or nothing. Trust me, there are so many happy founders out there that are running companies that just generate a couple $100,000 for them personally every single year. And through that, you can do it for years and years and be very happy. And my last piece of advice, which is probably the most important, is do not procrastinate on your business model. You don't have a business until you have first paying customers. So make sure to very quickly test business models out. It's okay if you don't make money from the first business model and if that doesn't work out, because you always have the opportunity to change. But if you're procrastinating on making money, you will never figure out how to turn this idea into a revenue generating business. And that's ultimately why we're all here. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If you got some value from this, please just check it out. Subscribe, turn on the bell so you can be the first to find more videos from me and the We Are No Code channel. With that, thanks so much, and make sure to learn the skills and the strategies to make you succeed in the long run. Let's go, my friends.